I was about 16 when this happened, and I'm 24 now, so it's been a while, but man, it's burned into my memory. It was one of those rare nights when I had the house all to myself. My brother was off doing some military training course, and my parents were away on vacation. I was still in high school, so staying up late was a treat I didn't get often. Usually, I'd be in bed by a reasonable hour, but that night, I was hyped to finally have the chance to play video games into the wee hours. I was deep into World of Warcraft, headphones on, completely lost in Azeroth. The feeling of being alone in the house was this weird mix of pure joy and a little bit of nerves, like freedom, but also it's just you and the quiet. It was around 3 a.m. Yeah, I know the cliche witching hour or whatever. I was glued to my screen, music blaring through my headphones, when I heard this faint tapping sound. It was soft at first, barely noticeable over the game's soundtrack and the clatter of my keyboard. But it kept going rhythmic, like someone was lightly knocking on my door. I paused, yanked off my headphones, and just sat there, straining to listen. My room was pitch black. Mom was a total stickler about saving electricity, always nagging me and my brother about leaving lights on, so I was dead certain every light in the house was off. I triple-checked before settling in for the night. The tapping didn't stop, and when I turned my head toward the sound, I noticed something seriously off. There was light coming from the hallway, spilling under the crack of my door. Not just a faint glow, but a legit light like someone had flipped a switch out there. My heart started racing because that wasn't right. And then I saw it. Shadows moving under the door, like the silhouette of a pair of feet standing right outside. I froze, my palms getting sweaty, my breath catching in my throat. I knew it couldn't be my family. The front door to our house was this heavy metal thing that made a loud, unmistakable clank whenever it opened or closed. I'd have heard it from a mile away if someone came home. Plus, I'd locked every door and window before I started gaming. No way anyone was supposed to be in the house. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it might be a burglar who'd somehow gotten in. That thought wasn't exactly comforting, but it was better than letting my mind spiral into something worse. I sat there, staring at the door, trying to decide what to do. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I knew I had to face whatever was out there, so I forced myself to stand and crept toward the door. My hand was shaking as I reached for the knob. I stood there for what felt like forever, probably a minute, just psyching myself up. The second my fingers brushed the doorknob, the light in the hallway went out. Just poof, gone. The house was dead silent again. I held my breath, waiting, and then I heard it, a faint whistle coming from the other side of the door. It wasn't a tune I recognized, just this creepy, off-key sound, like someone was lazily blowing air through their lips. It made my skin crawl, and I yanked my hand back like the knob was on fire. I was petrified, legit thinking I might have a heart attack if I opened that door. The fear was overwhelming, like nothing I'd ever felt before. I stood there frozen for a few minutes, trying to get my head straight. Eventually, I worked up the nerve to grab the knob again and slowly cracked the door open. Nothing. The hallway was empty, dark, and quiet. I flipped on every light in the house and checked every room, every closet, every corner. No one was there. No signs of a break-in, no footprints, no nothing. I was shaking, but I was also kind of amazed I'd even had the guts to leave my room after that. Sleep? Yeah, that wasn't happening. I went back to my computer and kept playing WoW, trying to distract myself, hoping the game would calm me down. I stayed up until the sun started peeking through the curtains, and only then did I crawl into bed, exhausted. I skipped school that day, told my parents I was sick. Honestly, I didn't have the mental energy to deal with anything after that night. The craziest part, I'd never experienced anything paranormal before, and nothing like that has happened in the house since. Our place doesn't have any spooky history. No dead owners, no ghost stories, nothing. It was just that one freaky night, and I'm still shook thinking about it. I really hope it stays that way. So here's a story from when I was 19. The funny thing is, it doesn't really stick in my memory as a scary moment until I stay in a caravan, and then when the lights start going off, it usually comes flooding back. So for a bit of context, my older brother, as dearly as I love him, is a bit of a dipstick. He's one of those people who goes through life on instinct, but the snag is that his instincts are generally terrible, and they get him into lots of scrapes. Every so often, one of those scrapes ends up involving me. One thing he excels at, though, is driving. Dad's a mechanic, and so since my brother was a preteen, he's been fixing up and racing a certain model of car. Well, the racing didn't start till he was a teen, but still he's never made much money from it. But as long as he's kept up on cigarettes, weed, and booze, well, he's a happy bunny. Historically, I've never gotten on with his girlfriends, though this is in part down to the difficulties that I've had before dating other girls throughout the early part of my life. But mostly because my bro has a knack for picking up complete head-the-balls. So when we were chatting, buzzed one night, and he told me that he thought that his new girlfriend, Chantal, was the one, I decided to drag myself back up north to meet the poor unfortunate. You know, I can be pretty judgmental, I admit, and when I met Chantal, I formed a snap judgment that she was no different to his usual fare of crazy. She had the look he goes for, a permed and platinum blonde girl with huge jugs crammed into a track top. Her nails, you can tell a lot about a girl from her nails, with cherry red witchy things bolted on with glue and far too long to allow you to do anything practical with them. As I entered our living room and saw her, she was pecking away at the screen of a smartphone like a bird trying to text, and she barely acknowledged me as my brother introduced us. And I think the look I gave him said it all, because before long, he was nervously chattering away about anything and everything that he imagined we had in common. You know, I made all the effort that I could after a 4-hour drive, but she and I could barely hold a 2-sentence conversation together when my dad called me into the other room. Storage Hunters was on, and he offered me a beer. I pretty much sprinted out the door. "So what do you think about Chantal?" he asked me, casting me the sidelong glance he uses when he expects me to go off on one. Now, I belched at him and left it at that, not really knowing where to begin. "You know, your brother is pretty taken with her," he says at this point. When I pull my family call my iguanas look, where I continue to face the TV but look at my dad to my side. "What do you want, Dad?" "Well, you could go with him to his race this weekend." I pretty much spat my drink out at that, since his next race was in Scotland, and I just finished my last long-ass drive. "Come on, mate, it means so much to him." Nip didn't take to her, and you know what he thinks about your mom's opinion. Admittedly, this should have been a red flag. My nan is like a lie-seeking missile, and she's old enough that she doesn't give a crap. Just picture Olenna Tyrell from Game of Thrones, but Irish and constantly carrying a pack of 20 Regal in her bra. But I'm sentimental sometimes, and my big bro is such a massive fanny that my opinion probably is quite important to him. My dad senses my hesitation and presses home the advantage until I'm cramming my luggage back into my car along with my brother's gear and Chantal's Barbie pink suitcase, which I'm pretty sure is big enough to serve as a viable alternative to the Soyuz capsule. Well, I probably shouldn't get further off topic. I like to point out that it later emerged that the reason my dad wanted me to go so badly was because he had a lady friend coming around and wanted to get his end away. Screw you, Dad. Anyway, we take the trip up. My bro leads the way while I follow in my beat-up old Golf, making painfully awkward small talk with Chantal in the passenger seat. She pecks away at her phone, the first 2 hours unadulterated hell, but eventually, we start to talk a little more, and when I mention that I had recently been dumped by my boyfriend, she actually switches off the screen and consoles me. She makes me feel better by putting on some music, and we bond over a shared love of McFly. By the time that we get to my brother's friend's place in Scotland, we're getting on really well. The place we're staying in is one of those fixed caravan sites. I believe they're called trailer parks in the US. It's a little dingy, especially since holiday season is mostly over now, and people are leaving ahead of the site closing for the winter. But at the same time, the setting is really beautiful. We get set up inside. Bro and Chantal will get the bed. I'll get to hear them knobbing from the converted sofa. And since light is fading and Chantal is complaining of not having 3G, my bro decides to take us to a poker night at the local pub. I stick around at the caravan though, because I knew that I'd get separated from the others and probably cornered for some awkward conversation with a pervy old man if I went. They haven't been gone for much more than an hour when Chantal starts texting me. The penny drops at this point that this is a thing. I don't know if it's FOMO or just generally being bored with the surroundings, but I figure that at any one time she's probably texting 4 or 5 people. And to be honest, I don't mind. I mean, there's nothing on TV, and with just my music playing in the darkness, give me a break, I was being emo. My thoughts keep drifting back to my boyfriend, so I'm feeling sorry for myself. Her texting style irritates me a little, though. She keeps using text speak but sending really long messages, and because the signal's patchy, they keep coming through either incomplete or in the wrong order, leading me to piece together what she's talking about like I'm in Memento or something. She also does this weird cross-eyed tongue-out emoticon at least twice per message. After a while, she talks about how the game's getting good and stops sending messages. Right as I'm drifting off to sleep, I get a call from an unknown number. I decline it out of hand. I've had the same number since I was 15 and made some very poor choices with which companies I gave it out to. But then almost immediately, the same number dials me again. At this point, I get pissed off. The boyfriend who ditched me has developed a habit of getting drunk and then calling me looking for an easy shag. I decline the call again and ignore the voicemail. A short while later, I'm jerked out of sleep by Chantal. She's texting me again, asking if I'm still awake and if my bro left the keys to his car in a caravan because he can't find them. I say yes and ask how the poker tournament went, and she says really well. Which caravan is it again? At this point, I'm rolling my eyes, presuming that they're messing around, so I just reply back with a model and what it looks like. Over the music from my earphones, though, I hear a noise. It sounded like a man's laugh, but not my brother's. I'm not really sure if that's what I actually heard, but it's isolated as hell out in this campsite, and my heart starts to race. So I stand up and go to the door. I can't see anything at all through the peephole, like it's literally black and there's just no light pollution out here. But as I pull the earphones out, I can hear someone crunching around in the gravel. I nearly soiled myself when my phone vibrated in my hand. It was another text from Chantal. It read, "Let me in XXX." For some reason, this was the point where my standard, "I learned in the dark scary catness" turned into full-blown fear. I think it was because the footsteps that I could hear were way too heavy and were trying to be way too quiet. My brother's quite light-footed, but a loud drunk, and I just know that I would have heard him and Chantal coming from a mile off, or my bro would have impersonated a werewolf or something that would have utterly failed but scared the crap out of me. He's also like a homing pigeon, and there's no way that he would have needed telling which caravan was which. I looked down at Chantal's last text and saw the difference in style. It was shorter, capitalized, no annoying derp smiley. I just stood there frozen in the darkness. I have no idea how long for either. I figured that they must have been after the car and asking about the keys. My mind ran through a detailed CSI-style postmortem of them finding my body, and I was wondering if it was just theft that I had to worry about when my stream of thought was interrupted by a series of bangs and a snapping noise like a whip crack. Suddenly, I can see light through the peephole, and I'm in full flight or fight mode now, so it takes me a while to lean forward and look through it again. The security light of the caravan opposite is on, but the door beneath it is warped and bent for being forced open. I can see one of them running around inside while the other stands by my brother's car. And then came the words, as usual with me, "Flight 1 over fight." Pretty much as soon as I heard that, I went into the bathroom on the far side of the caravan and pushed the window open. I was sure that they'd hear the noise that I made getting out, at first my shoes squeaking against the fiberglass. I think that's what caravans are made out of, right? And then the crunch as I landed into the gravel. But I didn't stick around to figure that out. I bolted into the raised woodland just behind the caravan, not far, but far enough that I had to feel blindly ahead of myself in case I walked into a tree. Once I was completely disorientated, I just waited. I waited for a long time until I heard the first crash of another door being broken, and no more than a minute later, the sound of screeching tires. I never came out until I heard my brother calling for me, and even then, I waited until I could see that they were alone. And I damn near throttled him when Chantal told me that he'd been bragging all night about how he was going to use his poker winnings to buy new brakes for the car he raced. Being the doting older brother, he was absolutely livid that I stood by while his car had been pinched and not taking his keys with me for a jolly little game of cat and mouse with some criminals in the woods. I have no idea how I got mentioned at this poker night, but I'm really glad that my brother's now-wife texts like a child on morphine and that my scumbag ex dumped me so I could mope in the dark. I wish that I could say that this is the first and last time that my brother nearly got me killed, but fortunately, it isn't. When I was young, from the ages of 2 to 10, I lived on a 7-acre ranch. There was a small house in the front of the property where we lived, a huge grass yard and cabinet shop behind it, and an orchard in the very back full of walnut trees. My father was a carpenter then, and always worked in the shop, and my mother was a school teacher that was almost always busy. Because of their jobs and the fact that they were new to parenting as I got older, they really didn't pay as much attention as they probably should have to where I would wander off. I would spend my days roaming around a yard there, playing in the dirt and running through the walnut trees. I obviously didn't question my lack of supervision. It was fun to explore this huge plot of land, and I just thought that I was being a normal kid. When I was about 7 years old, my father surprised me with a brand new, child-sized ATV. It wasn't one of the electric ones that, probably picturing. Either it was a damn fast gas-powered quad four-wheeler. Now, at this point, a good amount of you are probably questioning why someone would give a gas-powered ATV to a 7-year-old child. But like I said, my parents were a bit reckless, and my dad really just wanted me to have some fun. Pretty much right after I got the thing and I learned how to ride it by myself, I started going farther into and past the property than I ever had before. Now I had a free ride basically as far as my young self would let me go before turning back, and I started riding through the orchards behind my house almost every day, and I had loved it more than I had loved anything before. I would leave my house and be gone for hours. After a while, I gradually started roaming farther and farther away from my house as I became more brazen and a little older. Now, I would ride down this dirt path and let past what I assumed was a neighbor's land into a ditch that held water. At the time, I just liked looking at the water as it flowed, and I felt like I was a little bit of an explorer. I honestly never even contemplated that what I was doing could be the least bit dangerous, and I really don't think my parents knew how far I was riding. When I think back on it now, just the idea of riding a pretty dangerous piece of equipment far away from my house without my parents knowing where I was, and before cell phones even existed, it's pretty scary in itself, as I could have crashed or hit my head and no one would have been able to find me. However, luckily this never happened, and that's not what this story is about. So one day, like every other day now, I was riding far away from my home, and I passed a man wearing a dirty white shirt, denim jeans, and a farmer's hat. I remember it vividly as it was the first person that I had seen in all that time that had been out there. I remember the surprised look in his eyes as he stared at me while I rode past. I had no reason to stop, and my parents had always taught me about stranger danger, so I just kept going and forgot about it. On the way back home a couple of hours later, I was coming up to the same spot, and it dawned on me that this is where I had seen that man. I looked ahead, not expecting him to actually be there. As I said, it had been hours. Yet as the trees parted, there he was. No, I really didn't think it was too weird because I figured that he was either a farmer or a homebody. So when I just kept driving, coming closer to where he was, he seemed friendly, to be honest. He had a big smile on his face like he was happy to see me, and to my 10-year-old self, I just thought that he was a friendly guy. So I waved at him as I passed by, and he waved back, and I continued on my way and drove home without thinking much about it. I don't really remember how much time had passed between then and the next time that I went riding, but it couldn't have been more than a couple of days. And like usual, I took the same dirt road and passed the same few orchards to the same ditch full of water. I didn't think much about the previous encounter, so I hadn't been thinking about the stranger with the big smile. I was sitting on the edge of the ditch when I heard footsteps in the dirt coming up from behind me. Again, I remember this vividly because it was not a common occurrence to see anyone on this trail. I remember being more curious than scared and turned around to see the same stranger with a smile, but this time his smile seemed to be a bit more of a toothy grin. He called out to me as he walked up, asking what my name was in a heavy southern drawl, and I told him with confidence that I wasn't really allowed to talk to strangers, to which he said, "Yeah, that's a good idea, although you really shouldn't be out here all by yourself. It could be dangerous for a kid your age." I remember this striking me in the gut with a little bit of a butterfly feeling. I wasn't afraid, but I did feel uneasy. This piqued my curiosity, though, as I wondered what he meant, so I asked him. He continued to walk closer to me slowly and answered, "Well, I heard they found a little boy out here just around your age. In fact, I think it was that ditch right there where he drowned. I would like to point out here that although my parents were reckless, they were not stupid. If there had been a drowning near our house that was reported, or there had been a story in the paper, they definitely wouldn't have let me out anymore." Anyway, he continued, "Hey, why don't you come with me, and I'll take you back to your parents? It's not safe out here for a kid your age." "It's okay. I have my quad right here. I'll just ride back." I pointed over to the side of him where my quad was, but he didn't look. His eyes remained fixed on me. They were deep brown, almost black in fact, and they were piercing into me. At this point, I was scared and knew that this could be a bad situation. No, I was hoping that he was just a concerned old man, but there was no way that I was going with him anywhere. I got to my feet and started walking to my quad, to which the man said, "Should a kid your age be riding something that dangerous? Let's just put it in my truck, and I'll give you a ride back." "I don't see a truck," I said, looking around, hoping to talk my way out of this situation. "Well, yeah, it's right over there on my property. You actually can't see it from here," he said, his smile widening. "It's really okay. I'll just go now," I said, starting again to walk to my quad. But as I passed him, he reached and grabbed my arm. "You really shouldn't be out here," he said, staring me deep in the eyes. "It's not safe for little kids. Let me go." "You're hurting me," I shouted, starting to panic, but this only made him grip tighter. "Maybe you don't deserve to go back home. What kind of parents would let their kids out here all alone anyway? Maybe you should come home with me, and I'll take care of you." At this point, I was about to pee my pants. I was freaking out, and I just started to scream. I don't know if I was saying anything. I just know that I was screaming as loud as I ever had before. This only seemed to anger him, though, as his once toothy grin turned to a face of anger. He put his hand over my face, and I took this opportunity to bite at his finger as hard as I could. I still remember the taste of blood, so I know I hurt him pretty badly. Thankfully, this caught him off guard as he finally let me go. Now I knew this was my one chance to get away from this weirdo, so I booked it to my quad as he winced in pain. "Ah, little B-word, get the heck over here," he cried in anger. I knew that I didn't have much time, so I jumped on my quad and turned the key as fast as I could. It started up, and just as I pulled the gas handle, I felt a hand start to grab my neck. Luckily, he didn't have a grip yet as I was already starting to drive away. Now I punched it and hauled us out of there. At this point, all I could hear was the sound of my quad, so I wasn't sure if he was running after me, but I wasn't going to look, as I could possibly crash and be here. Well, I drove down that dirt path as fast as the quad would go, probably the fastest that I'd ever driven it. When I got home, I peeled out into the dirt and ran into the house, hoping to God that my mom was home. I burst into her room bawling, and there she was. She asked me what was wrong, but I couldn't talk yet. I was just so afraid. I just kept bawling, and I think that I cried for a good 30 minutes before I could summon up the strength to stop and tell her what had happened. And I remember the fear in her eyes as I described what happened. She just pulled me close to her and hugged me as hard as she ever had. The next day, I talked to a police officer and recounted the story of what transpired. I honestly don't remember much after this, as I think that I just started to block it out. It's not really something a 10-year-old wants to think about, right? Needless to say, they never let me off the property again. My dad started drinking too, and we actually lost the house soon after this anyways, so I didn't have to live there much longer. Recently, though, I was thinking about that day after I started trying to remember various parts of my childhood. My parents had never told me what happened after the cops were called, and I had never really asked because I try not to think about it. So yesterday, I went to their house and asked my mom if they ever found the guy there, considering that he had to live pretty close to our property. She was kind of startled by the question, because we hadn't talked about this in 15 years. She paused for a minute as if pondering whether to tell me and said, We didn't actually have any neighbors out that way. It was all corporate-owned land, and the description you gave didn't match any of the neighbors in the other direction. We called the cops, and they went to search where you told us you were, but the guy was long gone by the time that they got there. They looked around the property, though, and found an abandoned house that hadn't been used in years since the land was purchased. And when they looked inside, they could tell that there had been someone staying there. Apparently, he left his stuff behind. We never told you because, well, you were just way too young. But one of the things that they found was a black grocery bag, and it had a roll of duct tape and a hunting knife inside of it. So this happened less than a month ago. I'm a petite female. I'm in my 20s. I'm currently living in Mexico to escape life a little after postgrad, in a city that's not known as a dangerous place. A lot of foreigners live here, in fact, and I haven't heard of any safety concerns. I'm living with my cousin who works from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. The houses are in a pretty good area with a school, a nice hotel, and a Starbucks within walking distance. And just to give you an idea of how unexpected this was, this incident happened while my aunt was visiting us from Mexico City. She stayed home all day with me while I usually studied or watched Netflix. On this day, I was planning on having a chill day since I had woken up around 11:30. Now I'm watching something on my computer when I start to hear some loud pounding, like someone was working on something with a hammer. This is around 12 p.m. I thought that my aunt let someone in to repair something. I was under the assumption that my aunt was still in the house, so I wasn't too worried and just continued to watch my show. The loud noises stopped, and I heard two male voices talk casually. This made me feel more confident, if I'm being honest, that they were there to fix something. I get up from my bed to fetch my phone. I don't have any service plan down here, so I messaged my aunt on Facebook to see what was going on. I didn't get a reply from her, so I just took it as she was busy. I go back to lying in my bed, not thinking anything of the noises. 5 minutes later, though, I hear footsteps coming up the stairs. Keep in mind, I'm laying in my bed with my back to the door when the door opens, and I see a man. He was a pretty normal-looking guy too, with facial hair, and was dressed rather clean. Like, if you saw him in public, you wouldn't think anything negative about him. As soon as he saw me, though, he shut my door and just went downstairs. And then I heard another huge noise that I later realized was him slamming the front door shut. My room is the first room directly above the stairs, so my first thought was, this repairman accidentally opened the door. I thought he was trying to get access to our patio or something. Honestly, I was a little confused, but again, didn't think too much about it. I slowly walked down the stairs, calling my aunt's name, but I get no response. As soon as I make it downstairs, my aunt, in a panicked voice, says, "They just robbed us and took the TV." Apparently, she forgot to lock the first iron door of the house, which made it easy for them to break in to open the second door. She said that when she was walking by from the store, she noticed someone by the house. She asked him what he wanted, and she said that he was looking for a teacher. Then he got into the car with the other man, and they left. She didn't notice the TV in the car or anything suspicious until she got to our house, that is. She also mentioned that someone had rung the doorbell before she left to go to the store, and when she went to check, no one was there. She believes that they've been watching her and my cousin. So when they opened my bedroom door, they were caught off guard and dipped. It's just really frightening to think about what could have happened if they didn't get scared off by seeing me. The cops came and were telling me, in fact, that people like this often kidnap girls or rape them. I know I got lucky on this one. I just moved into a house near my new workplace a couple weeks ago. The house is fairly huge, but it only has 2 big bedrooms, which take up most of the space, a shared kitchen and bathroom, and a small bedroom adjacent to the kitchen which is now used as a storeroom. The guy who used to occupy the small bedroom, he moved out a couple of years ago and left some of his belongings scattered around on the floor. The owner of the house didn't bother with it at all. The lock is broken, so the door is always ajar. We keep the lights off most of the time. I split the rent with this guy named Daniel, whom I had never met before. We met online, and he was also looking for a quiet friend to split the rent with. He was the one who recommended the house to me, in fact. He moved in there 3 weeks earlier because I was still busy doing my work project in another town. The house has no living room, and the 2 main bedrooms are located at the front of the house, adjacent to each other, and each has a front door leading to the front yard and a back door leading to the kitchen, which takes up much of the space in the back side of the house. Daniel, well, he doesn't talk much, and I only see him occasionally when either of us happens to be cooking in the kitchen at the same time. But most of the time, we like to keep to ourselves and don't mind each other's business. So I had been living there for a couple of weeks when one night I invited my good friend Jerry over for dinner, since he's really good at cooking. I left him alone in the kitchen while I just cleaned my room. Then, by the time he had to go home, he told me about how the guy next door was acting strange. When I asked him what he meant, he said that the guy was watching him while he was in the kitchen. My friend said that he caught the guy poking his head out several times and quickly hiding behind the doorframe before my friend could say anything. So I told my friend that the guy is a bit strange, he doesn't talk much, and we just joked around a little, guessing if he's gay, if he's got a crush on my friend or something, or maybe he actually just wanted to see what was going on, or maybe he just wanted to join us but was too shy to ask. Anyway, after my friend left, I made a mental note that next time I would ask him to join us. A week later, I came home from work late at night, and as I went into the kitchen to make some tea, I found Daniel cooking his dinner. So I told him that I'm inviting some friends over for dinner next week and asked if he wanted to join us. He said thank you, but he would be coming home very late since he has night shift next week. I told him that I was sorry if my friend and I made too much noise in the kitchen the other night and it bothered him. He said that he didn't know what I was talking about though, since he had got home from work really late at around 12 o'clock every night for the whole week. In fact, he would be on nights for the whole month since his friend, with whom he shares the night shift's responsibilities in rotation, had recently broken his leg in an accident. So he wasn't home when my friend came over. This was strange because we had assumed that he was home. I mean, why he lied, I have no idea. Maybe he was just embarrassed that my friend had caught him peeping around, and I thought that my friend must have told me about it. So, well, I didn't press the matter any further. The following week, my friends came over as planned. Again, we let Jerry do all the cooking while we played some games in my room. When I went into the kitchen to check if dinner was ready, Jerry told me that the guy did it again. He apparently watched him quietly, and just like before, he poked his head out of the doorframe only to hide as quick as possible. And this time, Jerry said hi and asked if he wanted to join us, but this weirdo didn't answer him. This is where it all got really strange. I told Jerry that that was impossible since Daniel was still at work. But then he told me to go and check the room myself if I didn't believe him, pointing at the small bedroom. When I told him that the room is empty and it's a storeroom, he didn't believe me. He said that he thought it's Daniel's room since that's where he'd seen him poking his head out to peep at him. And I told him, no, Daniel's room is the one next to the bathroom. We frowned at each other for a while, and then almost instantly, we both walked to the storeroom to open the door. We found it empty, dark, all the windows were closed, and the only entrances into the house were through the front door of my room and Daniel's and a back door next to the bathroom. We would have seen them if somebody had entered the house through my room. My friends are now convinced that the room is haunted. When I asked Daniel about it, he said that he had no idea. I've tried to ask the owner about the house. He said that nobody has ever died in the house, and that he knows of at least. I've also tried asking around to find out more about the history of the house. So far, I always get the same answer, which leads me to the guy who used to occupy it. If there is a ghost in that room, he must know something about it, but since the owner of the house doesn't have his phone number, I have no idea how to contact him. One of the things that bother me the most, though, is how indifferent Daniel is about all this. He just carries on with life as if nothing's happened. It makes me think that he must know something as well, since he was the one who recommended the house to me. But being such a weird and quiet person, I don't think I would get anything from him. You know, I've been thinking these past few days, I really like living here, but the fact that there may be something watching me, or that my roommate may be lying and stalking me quietly, makes me feel really creeped out. I grew up in the Deep South, a region that's as much a mistake as it is a tragedy. I was not raised religious. My family did believe in God, but my parents had more faith in an education than a pulpit. I moved out when I was 20. This was the height of the recession. Jobs were shedding, going to school was a must. You know, I was working by day and doing a few classes by night. The first thing that happened was when I received a call from my landlord while I was at work one day. "Hi Sam, are you home?" Hi, no, I'm actually at work." "Oh, well, I drove up and noticed that your door was open, and when I came back I was going to swing by and say hey. And what do you know, your door was not only closed, but it was locked." Honestly, I was confused by that whole conversation and considered that maybe someone broke in or something, but being at work and being busy, I didn't think much of it. Work was so fast-paced, and I just quickly forgot about it all. No, and I forgot to mention, my place was in the middle of nowhere. I did have him check my place to make sure that I wasn't missing anything, and he did, and it was all there. That night, I drove home, and I got home and noticed that things felt off. I didn't mind it. I mean, I had schoolwork to do, so I just got busy and eventually just went to sleep. But over the next few days, though, things began to happen. My lights turned off, and when I got up and turned them on, they just switched off again. Also, when I would turn my lights off, I swear that I could see a figure standing in my doorway. I tried to brush it off as my imagination, though, but then came the dreams, and they were just so vivid. For almost a week straight, I had the most horrible dreams that I've ever had, and these dreams don't feel as if they're for me. I know that sounds confusing, but now I can see, smell, and even taste. I think it should also be noted that I was not drinking or doing drugs, and these dreams were just unlike anything I've ever experienced. To give you a better idea, I'm going to tell it in the perspective I experienced it from. So there's a fire, and the whole village is burning. I can hear screaming, and there are concussions from gunshots. It burns my nose, and there's smoke. I see little ones and women running away. I hear the other men screaming and fighting. I'm looking for someone. My wife and child. Where are they? Why are they attacking us? And then I see them, two white, one brown hand with a beard, and the other dirty blonde. Now I hear them yelling. They're speaking in English, but I can't understand them. One raises his weapon to me. Smoke rolls, and I hit the ground. I taste something like copper, and I think it's blood in my mouth, and all I can think of is, where are they? And then it just goes black. I wake up sweating, drenched in fact, and I feel like I've lost someone dear to me. I would be lying if I said that I didn't break down and weep. The absolute loss that I felt was unlike anything I've ever experienced. I started staying later at work after this, looking for any reason to not go home. But the last straw for me was when I heard the music. I was studying for a test, and my window was open. I had my headphones on, listening to some garbage rap song, anything to get me through this study guide. And then I began hearing something through my headphones. Well, I didn't have them up loud. It was coming from outside of my window. It's a wind instrument and drums, and all I can say is that the tune was really sad. I don't know what it meant, but it was just so sad, and it just got louder. At this point, I'm pretty certain that I must be going crazy. I think I grabbed a weapon, sure that someone was outside, loaded a magazine, and burst outside. I sweep the fields with my weapon light, and there's nothing. No sound, no music, no people. It's close to 11 p.m., and I call my dad and tell him everything that's going on. I'm pretty sure that I'm losing my mind. Maybe I've cracked from stress or something. But my father tells me something that kind of reassures me that I'm not. Where I live, behind me was a Native American burial ground. And if you know anything about Native Americans, you know that they generally didn't build mounds down south. My father also told me that I wasn't the first to report this kind of thing. Numerous family friends and hunters had reported hearing and seeing things while hunting or working back there over the years. There are whispers and whistling. Well, needless to say, I left the next week, and since leaving, I haven't had one issue. I've never really shared this in fear that I'd be called fake or attention-seeking. I did some research and was able to find that most tribes that built mounds down there did so if they were being forced to leave an area. Many did it as a last-ditch effort. Generally, they would have long houses devoted to keeping their elders' remains, and it's very likely that the ones in my area were rounded up and sent off on the Trail of Tears. You may say I'm lying or crazy, but this is my story. This is the story of my first stalker and how he tried to murder me. When I was in middle school, I was incredibly awkward, as most middle schoolers are, right? Now, I was lanky, thin, and not unlike, but not popular. I was a tomboy, and I grew up to be a lesbian, and yes, this is an important detail. And I'm pretty sure half the school had figured out my sexuality before I even did. So it came as a great shock to me, and half the school, when a boy, did eventually ask me out. I had a crappy home life and was desperate for attention, so despite not really liking the guy at first, well, I said yes. My friends were happy for me. In less than a week, my best friend, and one of the prettiest girls in the school, came up to me and told me that while I'd been out for lunch with our other mutual friend, she had seen him sulking around the subway where we'd eaten. I found this confusing and a bit weird, but didn't really pay much mind. The next few outings, I did keep an eye out, and he did indeed follow me. Keep in mind, he is my boyfriend, and we're literally dating. He doesn't have to act like this. He's not being shy trying to ask me out, and I'm not sure how he's already done that. So the question becomes, why is he following me? Now, I am confused, but middle school me brushes that off, thinking all boys are like this. Maybe he's just jealous or something. But his fears weren't entirely unfounded, I'll admit, as this other kid who I didn't know at all frequently liked to come up to me and say things that were really awkward, which honestly, what the heck? But that's a story for a different time. So I just assume that he's just following me because he's jealous or something. A week later, I'm done with this crap and confront him about it. He gives me the weakest excuse. I'm just protecting you. But this is lame for several reasons. One, wouldn't it make sense to just come with me and not stalk me from a distance? Two, I'd once and very publicly punched a boy 2 years older than me in the face for grabbing my behind and refusing to let go until I hit him. I've made it clear that I can look after myself, so this doesn't sit right with me. But I tell him to knock it off and just leave it at that. And to make a long story short, he doesn't, and I just dumped his behind. A few days after the dumping, through gossip and my friends being concerned, I come to learn that not only did he stalk me while we dated, he did it before and after as well. He didn't take the breakup well, and his solution to cope was to draw these comics, I guess, where he was an alien prince rescuing me, a human princess from entire armies. It involved a lot of self-deprecation both in and out of character, and disturbingly well-drawn gore. I know this because I constantly found them in my locker. It got so bad I actually brought it up at the school, and he was moved classes and a bunch of other stuff to keep him away from me. They wouldn't expel him since all they had was my word, but this was fine with me as that felt a little extreme at that point. He'd never hurt me, and I honestly didn't think he would. Now, how wrong I was there. So that was the end of it all, so I thought. A year and a half later, we all graduated. I thought I'd never see him again. The unfortunate reality, though, was that wasn't it. I'm second-generation French. My parents felt it was important that I go to a French immersion to keep in touch with my roots. This meant that I went to the nearest French immersion high school, which was his default assigned school. This wasn't a huge problem, though. It's a big school, so the first year passes without any incident. By mid-11th grade, however, almost all of my female friends have mentioned that they think they're being followed. Sure enough, my one friend from the same middle school, Jillian, gets followed. She confirms my suspicions. It's my stalker ex-boyfriend. At this point, I am very annoyed and really pissed off. It's been 2.5 years. I mean, get over it, right? Move on and stop being the kind of person who follows my friends around. Honestly, looking back, I wish that I had said something sooner. A day after my middle school friend confirms for me that my other friend, Sarah, comes to school with her knuckles bruised and murder in her eyes. Sarah tells us that last night she'd awoken in the middle of the night by the sound of her cat, Ringo, crying, but not just crying, meowing and hissing like nuts right in her ear. It turns out Ringo had caught sight of the stalker on the balcony, just staring into her window, and just standing there in the pouring rain. No umbrella, no hat, just standing there in a t-shirt and jeans, soaking wet in the middle of October. Her knuckles were bruised because in the seconds between waking up and seeing him, she jumped out of bed and had, out of pure fear and instinct, punched the window. It apparently scared him off, but she wasn't going to just let him get away with this. Now she screams for her dad, and together they chase him like 4 blocks before losing him. They called the cops, but they didn't do much aside from say, well, he's gone now. Call us if he turns back up. Obviously, she was livid, but there's nothing we can do about it at this point except walk together and glare daggers at him whenever we see him. A week later, Jillian comes to school and informs us the stalker had scoped outside a store for her entire 60-hour shift the night before. This was the last straw for all of us. We all decided that we'd confront him next time we saw him, as long as we weren't alone, that is. And the opportunity arises that very day. After school ended, we all gathered at the train station to head home. I'm on the platform with Jillian, Sarah, and my at-the-time girlfriend, Blake, and 2 male friends, one who's slightly autistic and one who's a tank of a guy, standing at 6 feet 2 inches and regularly hits the gym. His name was Jake. Jillian catches sight of the stalker, and points him out. I ask my friends to hang back while I confront him, but tell them to just keep an eye on us, and they all reluctantly agree. Now, at this point, I still think that he's a harmless weirdo who just needs to get his head out of his behind before someone actually beats him for what he's doing. Yeah, I walk up to him and tell him that he needs to just stop stalking me, to stop stalking my friends, and just never look at us again. I'm being firm but polite, and his immediate reaction is to call me a disgusting dyke and blah blah blah, more homophobic slurs. You know, you're going to hell, blah blah blah. Nothing I haven't heard a billion times before. Well, I told him once more to stop bothering me, stop following my friends, and learn some manners before I get the cops involved. And he gets all tense and rigid, and I'm thinking, good, mentioning cops scares him. But he's not scared. And before I can really think about what's happening, he pushes me off the platform and in front of an oncoming train. I fell backwards and hit my head against the railing, and I was really dazed. A few things happened at once after that. Blake screamed so loud and with such fear in her voice that I can still hear it to this day, almost 8 years later. And my autistic friend, startled by the noise and also having seen me fall, runs the opposite way screaming murder at the top of his lungs. That Jake was moving before I had even fallen all the way. By now, I just started to recover and started getting to my knees, and just in time to see him plow into this guy like a linebacker on steroids. They hit the ground, and he put his fist into the stalker's face, and they're both yelling. Jillian and Sarah have run after my autistic friend towards the end of the platform, and towards 2 peace officers running onto the scene. Blake is caught up to us and screaming my name and telling me to get up. The train horn is blaring, and I'm still dazed and swaying in place and trying to figure a way out back onto the platform. I remember Blake grabbing for my hand despite being too far, too high up, and sobbing and begging for me to climb. Please, just climb. I'm not sure what it was, a survival instinct, Blake's fear and pain, or the sheer desire to just get up and punch him for myself, but I did a really shitty run and jump at the edge of the platform. Now I hit it pretty hard and not high enough, just enough to wind me though. Blake, Jake, and several other strangers all surged forward and grab me anywhere they can reach and pull me up just seconds before the train comes into the station. It's a serious blur after that. I remember Blake holding me and crying and rocking and touching me anywhere she can. My arms, face, chest, and legs, anywhere, as if to make sure I'm real. The other people on the platform are on their phones, calling 911 and offering help where they can. I think some were comforting my friends or others there. There were a lot of shocked and crying people on that platform. By now, the 2 peace officers have arrived. One is doing damage control and talking to Jake, the only one really capable of doing so at that moment. The other is checking on the would-be murderer and cuffing him once he's on his feet. Everyone gave their statements. Paramedics arrived, and I'm taken to the hospital, and the would-be murderer as well. I remember Blake being glued to my side the whole day and night. Well, I remember getting to the hospital and talking to cops and having a really big headache, and I have either forgotten or blocked most of the other stuff out, to be honest. Eventually, I'm given my diagnosis, just a minor concussion, before being allowed to go home. The would-be murderer is carted off and most certainly going to jail. And I know that he's alive and going away for a really long time, and at that moment, that's all I care about. The whole ordeal lasted 3 years and seriously messed with far too many people's psyche and ability to feel safe afterwards. It's 7, almost 8 years later since that day, and I still wake up with nightmares and sometimes screaming. I'm no longer with Blake due to reasons completely unrelated, but she was what really got me through all that crazy. No, I'm with someone else now, engaged actually, and Jake is set to be my best man because without him and Blake and the bravery of the several strangers, I wouldn't be alive today to tell you the story. I've never really shared this with anyone outside my family before. It's not something I talk about much, but after seeing some of the stories here, I felt like maybe it was time to get this off my chest. I'm in my 20s now, but the things that happened to me as a kid still give me chills when I think about them too much. My mom says I was always a sensitive child, not just emotionally, but in other ways that made her nervous. I don't remember a lot from when I was really little, but there are certain incidents that have been told to me so many times they feel like my own memories now. And some things I do remember clear as day, even though I wish I didn't. The first thing happened when I was 4. We were living in this modest, one-story house in Pinewood, a quiet suburb where nothing ever really happened. You know the type, kids riding bikes, neighbors having barbecues, that sort of place where the biggest drama was usually someone's dog getting loose. Our house wasn't fancy, but it had this big bay window in the living room that looked out onto the front yard. I used to sit on the window seat and watch people walk by. That day, I think it was late October because Mom had put up some Halloween decorations. I was playing in the living room while Mom was in the kitchen making dinner. It was getting dark outside, that weird twilight time when shadows start to stretch. I remember I had these little plastic animals I was lining up on the carpet, making a zoo or something. I suddenly got this feeling. It's hard to explain, but it was like when you know someone's watching you. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I looked toward the bay window, and there he was, the pale man. He was standing in our front yard, partially hidden behind a maple tree, but clearly looking right at me. He was so tall, impossibly tall, like he had been stretched. His skin wasn't just pale, it was almost gray-white, like nothing I'd ever seen before. And his face had these sharp, angular features. Everything about him was pointed. His chin, his nose, his fingers. His eyes were deep-set and dark, just staring right at me. I screamed. I remember dropping my toys and just screaming and pointing at the window. My mom came running in from the kitchen, still holding a wooden spoon with sauce dripping from it. "What's wrong, Emma?" "What's wrong?" she kept asking, but I couldn't stop screaming long enough to tell her. I just kept pointing at the window, crying, "The pale man, the tall, pointy man." Mom says she went to the window and looked out, but didn't see anything. She checked around the yard, even went outside for a minute while I sobbed on the couch. When she came back in, she tried to calm me down, telling me it was probably just shadows or my imagination, but I wouldn't stop crying. I was hysterical. I kept saying he was watching me, that he wanted to come inside. Mom says she'd never seen me so terrified before. Something about my reaction scared her too, because even though she didn't see anything, she grabbed her purse, wrapped me in a blanket, and we left the house. We stayed at my aunt's place that night. When we came back the next day, I wouldn't go near that window. Mom tried to convince me it was just my imagination, but I knew what I saw. For weeks after, I refused to be alone in that room. I'd scream if she tried to leave me there. Eventually, we moved out of that house. Mom never really said it was because of what happened, but I've always wondered. That was just the beginning, though. About 2 years later, when I was 6, we were staying at my grandmother's house for the weekend. It was this big old place with lots of rooms and creaky floorboards, the kind of house that seems magical to a kid, but probably just needs a lot of repairs. My grandmother was getting older, but still living by herself. She'd been a widow for over a decade at that point. My mom and my aunt were in the kitchen catching up and making lunch. I remember being bored, so I wandered off to explore the house. I ended up in my grandmother's bedroom. It was this formal room with a heavy wooden bed frame and floral curtains that always smelled like lavender and old perfume. I don't know how long I was in there before my aunt came looking for me. When she found me, I was sitting cross-legged on the floor by the bed, talking and laughing. She asked who I was talking to, and I looked up at her like she was silly for asking. "The girl," I said, pointing to the empty space across from me. "We're playing house." My aunt tells me she felt a chill run down her spine. She asked me to describe the girl, and I told her she had long brown hair in 2 braids and was wearing a blue dress with white flowers on it, just like the one my aunt used to wear when she was little. There was an old photo of my aunt in that exact dress on my grandmother's dresser. My aunt didn't immediately freak out. Instead, she sat down on the bed and asked me more questions. She asked if the girl had told me her name. I said no, but she was nice and seemed sad because she couldn't find her grandma. That's when my aunt got really quiet. She told me that sometimes people who have died can get lost on their way to heaven. She said if I wanted to help the girl, I should tell her to go find my grandmother, not my living grandmother, but my great-grandmother who had passed away years before. I turned to the empty space and repeated what my aunt told me. Then the strangest thing happened. I saw the girl's face change. She looked scared and confused. She says, "Grandma is dead," I told my aunt. My aunt nodded slowly and said, Tell her that's okay. Tell her to go to heaven, and her grandmother will be waiting for her there." I passed along the message, and what happened next is something I remember with absolute clarity. The girl smiled, a sad, sweet smile, and then looked up toward the ceiling. I followed her gaze and saw what looked like a staircase made of clouds forming above us, leading up to a bright, warm light. The girl stood up and gave me a little wave. "She's going now," I told my aunt, who had tears in her eyes even though she couldn't see what I was seeing. I watched as the girl climbed the cloudy steps, getting smaller and smaller until she disappeared into the light. Then the staircase vanished too, and the room felt suddenly colder and emptier. My aunt hugged me tight and made me promise not to tell my grandmother what had happened. She was worried it would upset her. It wasn't until years later that I learned the truth. My grandmother had lost a child, a little girl who died from pneumonia in the 1950s. She would have been around my aunt's age if she had lived. These weren't isolated incidents either. My family has a history of experiences. There's one story about my aunt that still gives me goosebumps. When she was about 4 years old, around the same age I was when I saw the pale man, my grandmother found her sitting in the corner of her bedroom, rocking back and forth. She was muttering something under her breath over and over. When my grandmother got closer, she realized my aunt was speaking in Portuguese, a language no one in our family knew or had ever been exposed to. My grandmother was so freaked out she called for my grandfather, but when they turned around to look at my aunt again, she was asleep on the floor. When she woke up, she had no memory of speaking Portuguese or sitting in the corner. As I got older, the experiences became less frequent but more intense. When I was around 10, we moved into another house, a 2-story place with a finished basement. My bedroom was upstairs at the end of the hall. I started hearing scratching sound in my walls at night. At first, Mom said it was probably mice, but our exterminator found no evidence of rodents. The scratching would start around 3 o'clock in the morning, always 3. It sounded like fingernails dragging slowly down the inside of the wall, right by my headboard. I started sleeping with music playing to drown it out, but sometimes it would get so loud the music couldn't cover it. One night, I woke up to find my bedroom door open, even though I distinctly remembered closing it before bed. I always closed it. I was afraid of the dark hallway. As I lay there trying to decide if I should get up and close it or just pull the covers over my head, I saw a shadow move across the doorway. It wasn't just any shadow. It was shaped like a person, but too tall and too thin to be my mom or anyone else. It paused right at my doorway, and I swear I could feel it looking at me, even though I couldn't see any eyes. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to scream or move. The shadow just stood there for what felt like forever, and then it slowly backed away into the darkness of the hall. The next morning, I told my mom and she checked the house for intruders, but of course there was no one there. She said I must have had a nightmare and sleepwalked to open my door, but I know what I saw. The thing that convinced my mom something weird was really happening came a few months later. She was home alone one afternoon. I was at school and we didn't have any pets at the time. She was folding laundry in the living room when she heard a child's laughter coming from upstairs, from my room. She thought maybe I had come home early from school without her noticing, so she called out my name. No response, just more giggling. She went upstairs to check and found my room empty, but my closet door was open and some of my toys had been arranged in a circle on the floor, toys that had been stored away in a box under my bed. While she was standing there, trying to make sense of it, she felt something tug on her shirt from behind. She spun around, but no one was there. That's when she heard a voice whisper, "Play with me." She ran downstairs, grabbed her phone and car keys, and waited on the front porch until I got home from school. We sage smudged the house that weekend. My mom, who had always been skeptical about paranormal stuff, bought a bunch of crystals and placed them around the house. She even had a local priest come by to bless the place. The activity died down after that, at least for a while. But there was one more incident, the last major one, that happened when I was 13. My mom and I had gone camping with some family friends in this state park about 2 hours from our house. We had 2 tents set up, one for the adults and one for me and my friend Katie. The first night was fine, just normal camping stuff, roasting marshmallows, telling stories around a fire, stargazing. But on the second night, I woke up around midnight needing to pee. I didn't want to wake Katie. so I quietly unzipped our tent and stepped outside with my flashlight. The campsite was dead silent. The fire had died down to embers, and everyone else was asleep. The bathroom was just down this little dirt path, maybe 100 yards from our site. I started walking, my flashlight beam bouncing along the ground in front of me. About halfway there, my flashlight started to flicker. I smacked it against my palm a few times, but it kept getting dimmer until it went out completely. The moon was bright enough that I could still see the path, so I kept going. That's when I heard it. Footsteps behind me. Heavy footsteps, like someone wearing boots, crunching on fallen leaves. I turned around expecting to see one of the adults from our group, but there was no one there. The footsteps stopped when I turned. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" No answer. I started walking again, faster now, and the footsteps resumed, matching my pace exactly. Every time I stopped, they stopped too. I was too scared to turn around again. When I reached the bathroom, I rushed inside and locked the door. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I waited in there for what felt like forever, trying to convince myself it was just an animal or the wind playing tricks on me. Finally, I gathered my courage and opened the door a crack to peek outside. The path was empty, but something caught my eye, a figure standing just beyond the tree line, partially hidden behind a large pine. It was tall and unnaturally thin, and even in the darkness I could tell its skin was pale, almost glowing in the moonlight. My blood ran cold. It was him, the pale man from when I was 4. He looked exactly the same, like he hadn't aged a day while I had grown up. He was just standing there, watching me with those deep-set eyes. I slammed the door shut and started screaming. I screamed until my throat hurt, until I heard voices and saw flashlight beams through the crack under the door. It was the adults from our campsite coming to see what was wrong. When they finally convinced me to open the door, I was hysterical, telling them about the pale man in the woods. They searched the area, but found nothing. My mom was ready to dismiss it as my imagination again, but our friend husband, who had been a park ranger years before, found something that made everyone uneasy, a set of footprints in the soft dirt that led from the tree line to the bathroom door. Long, narrow footprints that didn't match anyone in our group. We packed up and left that night, even though it was the middle of the night. No one questioned it. No one wanted to stay. I'm 23 now, and I haven't seen the pale man since that night at the campsite. The scratching sound stopped when we moved out of that house a year later. I haven't seen any more ghost girls or cloudy staircases to heaven. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I still get that feeling of being watched. Sometimes I hear whispers just at the edge of my hearing. And every once in a while, when I look in a mirror in a dark room, I swear I can see a tall, thin shadow standing behind me, just for a second, just from the corner of my eye. My mom thinks I've grown out of whatever sensitivity I had as a child. She thinks the distance from those experiences has helped me move on. But the truth is, I don't think you ever really escape these things once they found you. I think they're always there, just waiting. And I can't help but wonder if someday the pale man will return to finish whatever it was he started all those years ago at the house on Maple Drive. I still can't believe what happened to me 3 months ago. I've been trying to make sense of it, but I just can't. It's like my brain refuses to process it. You know, I've always been skeptical about paranormal stuff. Ghost stories were just that, stories, until I experienced something I can't explain. I'm 17, and I live with my dad in a pretty standard suburban house in Rochester, 2-story, 3 bedrooms upstairs, nothing special. My parents got divorced when I was 14, and my mom moved to California for work. Dad's been dating again for about 6 months now, and he's been spending more and more nights at his girlfriend Karen's place. I'm usually fine being home alone. I mean, I'm 17, not 7, but that night in March was different. It was a Thursday, and Dad had texted me around 6 saying he was staying at Karen's. No big deal. I ordered pizza, finished some homework, and by 11 o'clock, I was in my bedroom scrolling through TikTok. Our house gets really creepy at night. The heating system makes these weird settling noises, and the trees outside my window scrape against the siding when it's windy. That night was particularly windy, and every sound had me on edge for some reason. One thing about our house, the stairs are loud. Like, impossibly loud. They creak so bad that when I was younger and tried to sneak downstairs for midnight snacks, Dad would always catch me. You literally cannot go up or down those stairs without announcing yourself to the entire house. I don't normally lock my bedroom door, but that night I did. It wasn't because I was scared or anything. It had just become a habit whenever Dad wasn't home. Just an extra precaution, I guess. My bedroom is at the end of the hallway upstairs, with a bathroom directly across and 2 spare bedrooms next to mine. One is Dad's office, and the other is just a storage/guest room that nobody ever uses. I always keep the hallway light on when I'm alone. The light seeps under my door, creating this little glowing line that's oddly comforting. I was lying in bed watching some stupid dance videos when I heard it, the stairs creaking. At first, I thought maybe it was just the house settling, but no, it was definitely footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps climbing our noisy staircase, step by step, creak after creak. My immediate thought was that Dad had changed his mind and come home, but then I realized I hadn't heard the front door open or close, and Dad always calls out, "Lily, I'm home," when he comes in. I sat up in bed, my heart instantly racing. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs and then started down the hallway toward the bedrooms, toward my room. I stared at the crack under my door, holding my breath as the footsteps passed by my door. The light from the hallway suddenly disappeared, like something was blocking it completely, not just a shadow passing by, but total darkness. The footsteps continued past my room and into one of the spare bedrooms, Dad's office, I think. I could hear movement in there, not loud or violent, just movement. Like someone opening drawers, shifting papers. Ordinary sounds that would be completely normal if my dad was actually home, but he wasn't. I hadn't heard the front door. I hadn't heard his car pull up. I hadn't heard him call my name. I sat frozen in my bed, clutching my phone, wondering if I should call 911. What if it was an intruder? But why would an intruder be so casual about going through Dad's office? And how did they get in without me hearing the door? Then the footsteps came back into the hallway. They stopped right outside my door. The light under the door was still blocked completely. The doorknob rattled. Not violently, like someone trying to break in, but casually, like someone checking if it was locked. Just a quick jiggle of the handle. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I wasn't even sure my heart was still beating. I just stared at my door, waiting for it to burst open. But it didn't. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds, the footsteps moved away from my door. But here's the thing, they didn't go back toward the stairs. They went further down the hallway, toward the dead end where there's just a small linen closet. Then nothing. No more footsteps. The light under my door reappeared. Complete silence fell over the house. I sat there for what must have been 20 minutes, absolutely terrified to move. My phone was at 16% battery, and I was too scared to get up and grab my charger from my desk. I texted, "Dad, are you home?" 3 agonizing minutes later, he replied, "No, at Karen's like I said. Everything okay?" I wanted to tell him what was happening, but I was afraid that whatever was in our house would somehow know I was alerting someone, so I just wrote back, "Yeah, just thought I heard something." NVM. He sent back a thumbs up emoji. That was it. I was on my own. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but I know what I heard. Those stairs are unmistakable, and the doorknob definitely moved, and the light under my door definitely disappeared. But the scariest part, the feeling of being watched didn't go away. Even though the footsteps had stopped and the light had returned, I could feel eyes on me, like whatever it was hadn't left. It was just waiting, watching. I pulled my covers up to my chin, keeping my eyes fixed on the door. I tried calling my best friend Jenna, but it was after midnight and she didn't answer. I thought about calling 911, but what would I say? Hello, something walked up my stairs, but I didn't hear it come in, and now it's just somewhere in my house? They think I was crazy or playing a prank. At some point, I must have fallen asleep from pure exhaustion. I woke up at around 6 o'clock in the morning, my phone dead beside me. The sun was starting to rise, and my room was filled with that early morning gray light. The first thing I did was check under the door. The hallway light was still on. I listened for any sounds in the house but heard nothing. Eventually, I worked up the courage to unlock my door. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely turn the lock. When I finally opened it, the hallway was empty. I checked all the rooms upstairs. Nothing was disturbed. Dad's office looked normal. The guest room was untouched. The linen closet at the end of the hall was closed, and when I opened it, it was just full of towels and sheets like always. I went downstairs, half expecting to find the front door wide open or a window broken, but everything was locked tight. No sign of forced entry. No sign that anyone or anything had been in our house besides me. When Dad came home around noon, I told him what happened. He looked concerned, but ultimately chalked it up to me falling asleep while watching something scary on my phone. He checked all the doors and windows again, but found nothing suspicious. He said it was probably just a dream or my imagination working overtime. But I know what I heard. I know what I felt. And the weirdest part is that it hasn't happened again. I've been alone in the house dozens of times since then, and nothing. No footsteps. No doorknob rattling. No blocked light under my door. Sometimes I wonder if whatever it was got what it wanted that night, or maybe it's just biding its time, waiting to return. Either way, I sleep with my door locked every night now, and I've started putting a chair under the doorknob for extra security. I don't know what was in my house that night. I don't know how it got in without making a sound, or how it left without going back down those impossibly loud stairs. All I know is that it was there, and it wanted to get into my room. The worst part is not knowing. Not knowing what it was or what it wanted. Not knowing if it will come back. Not knowing if next time a locked door will be enough to keep it out. Dad's talking about selling the house next year when I go to college. I can't wait. I used to love this house, but now I just count the days until I can leave it behind for good. I still haven't told anyone else about this. I mean, what would I say? Even writing this out now, I know how it sounds. But I swear on everything I care about, this happened. It wasn't a dream, and it wasn't my imagination. Something was in my house that night. Something that climbed those stairs and checked if my door was locked. Something that disappeared down a hallway with nowhere to go. And sometimes when I'm alone in the house and it gets really quiet, I swear I can feel it watching me again. I've never openly shared what happened to me growing up in Oak Ridge. For nearly 20 years, I kept most of this to myself because I was afraid people would think I was crazy or making things up for attention. Even now, typing this out makes my hand shake a little, but I need to tell someone who might understand, or at least not immediately dismiss me. My parents bought a house in the Oak Ridge development when I was about 4 years old. It was a pretty typical suburban neighborhood, cookie-cutter houses with slightly different color schemes, neatly trimmed lawns, and families with 2.5 kids and a dog. Our house was at the end of a cul-de-sac, backing up to a small wooded area. From the outside, it looked perfectly normal. I remember the day we moved in. Mom was so excited about the big backyard and the basement that Dad could turn into a rec room. I was just happy I got my own bedroom with lavender walls. But that first night, something fell off. I couldn't explain it at 4 years old, but I felt like someone was watching me, not in a threatening way, just present. Within a few weeks, I started begging to sleep in my parents' room. At first, they thought it was just adjustment anxiety from the move, but I was genuinely terrified of my bedroom. I would cry and scream until they let me drag my blanket and pillow onto their floor. My mom started getting worried when this continued for months, especially since I couldn't really articulate what scared me. I just knew I wasn't alone in my room. It wasn't until I was about 6 that I actually saw her for the first time. I was sleeping on my parents' bedroom floor as usual. It was probably around 2 o'clock in the morning when I woke up for no particular reason. The room was dark except for the dim glow of my dad's digital alarm clock. As my eyes adjusted, I noticed a figure standing beside my mom's side of the bed. At first, I thought it was my mom getting up to use the bathroom, but then I realized my mom was still in bed. It was a little girl. She looked about my age, maybe a bit younger, with long dark hair and a pale blue nightgown that seemed old-fashioned, like from an old photograph. But the detail that made my blood run cold was what she was holding. an antique glass doll with porcelain skin and a frilly dress. We had that exact same doll in a box in our basement. My mom had found it when we moved in and kept it as a curiosity, though it always creeped me out. The girl wasn't doing anything threatening. She was just standing there, stroking my mom's hair with one hand while clutching the doll with the other, looking at my mom with what seemed like longing. Then, as if sensing my stare, she slowly turned her head and looked directly at me. I'll never forget her eyes. They weren't scary or glowing or anything supernatural like that. They were just sad, profoundly sad, in a way that's unsettling to see on a child's face. We locked eyes for what felt like forever, neither of us moving, until something in me snapped and I let out this ear-splitting scream. My mom bolted upright. My dad nearly fell out of bed, and the lights came on. But the girl was gone. I was hysterical, trying to explain what I'd seen, but my parents just assumed I had a nightmare. My mom held me and assured me there was no little girl in our house. Dad checked under the bed and in the closet to humor me, but of course found nothing. "Ashley, sweetheart, it was just a bad dream," my mom said, stroking my hair, just like the ghost girl had been stroking hers moments before. That only made me cry harder. The next morning, I insisted on showing them the doll in the basement, the exact same one the ghost girl had been holding. I remember the uncomfortable look my parents exchanged when I dragged them to the storage box where it was kept. The doll was there exactly as it had been, but now I was convinced it belonged to the girl I'd seen. "Where did this come from?" I demanded, pointing at the doll but refusing to touch it. My mom hesitated before answering. "It was just left in the attic when we bought the house, honey. It's probably from the previous owners." I later learned the truth was more complicated. Our development had been built on land that once belonged to a single family. Their old farmhouse had been torn down in the 70s to make way for the subdivision, but apparently they had a daughter who died young. I didn't learn these details until I was older, when I overheard neighbors talking at a block party. Supposedly, the little girl had fallen into a well on the property sometime in the 1930s. They never built houses over where the well used to be. That area became part of the community playground, which somehow made it even creepier to me. After that first sighting, things started happening that I couldn't explain. My belongings would disappear, only to reappear months later in impossible locations. When I was 7, I got a silver necklace with a pendant for my birthday. I wore it constantly for about 2 weeks, then one day it was just gone. I was devastated and searched everywhere. My parents helped me look, but we all assumed it was lost for good. 6 months later, I came home from school and found the necklace perfectly placed in the center of my bedroom carpet. The chain formed into a perfect circle, with a pendant in the middle. It wasn't tangled or dusty. It looked like someone had just carefully arranged it there moments before. There was no way it had been there all along. My room was vacuumed weekly, and the necklace was right in the middle of an open space. When I showed my mom, she seemed disturbed but tried to rationalize it. "Maybe it was stuck in your laundry and finally fell out," she suggested, though we both knew that made no sense. When I was 9, my favorite soccer jersey went missing after a game. Again, we searched everywhere. The car, the laundry, under furniture. It was just gone. A year later, I opened my closet to find it hanging there, clean and pressed, as if it had never been missing. The thing is, it was hung up at a height I couldn't even reach without a stool. And it wasn't wrinkled or dirty like it would have been if it had been crammed somewhere all that time. My parents started to get annoyed when I mentioned these occurrences, especially as they became more frequent. They suggested I was absent-minded or seeking attention. After a while, I stopped telling them altogether. By the time I hit middle school, I'd gotten somewhat used to my invisible roommate. I learned to live with the sense of being watched, with items moving or disappearing. Sometimes I'd wake up to find my TV turned on to random channels, despite the remote being across the room. Lights would switch on and off when I was alone in the house. Once, I came home to find all my stuffed animals arranged in a perfect circle on my bed, something I definitely hadn't done before leaving for school. What was strange was that no one else in my family experienced these things. My young brother, Mark, never had toys go missing or complained about feeling watched. My parents never woke up to unexplainable noises or found their belongings rearranged. It was just me. But occasionally neighbors would mention odd things. Mrs. Peterson next door once asked my mom if we had a little girl visiting because she'd heard a child giggling in our backyard when she knew I was at school. The family across the street once called the police because they thought they heard a child crying in our house when they knew we were all out for dinner. The police found nothing, of course. One summer evening when I was 14, I was home alone working on a school project at the kitchen table. My parents had taken Mark to his baseball game, and I'd stayed behind to finish my work. The house was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner. I was deeply focused on my textbook when I felt a distinct tug on my ponytail. I whipped around, heart racing, but saw nothing. "Hello?" I called out shakily, knowing no one would answer. As I turned back to my book, I noticed something on the floor a few feet away, a small handprint, like someone with wet hands had touched the hardwood. But it wasn't water. It looked like mud, fresh mud. I approached it cautiously and knelt down. It was definitely a child's handprint, much smaller than mine. As I stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, I heard a soft giggle from the hallway leading to the bedrooms. My blood ran cold, but something in me had had enough. After years of unexplained events, I was tired of being afraid in my own home. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice stronger than I felt. "Why are you here?" There was no answer, but the temperature in the kitchen suddenly dropped. I could see my breath fogging in front of my face, despite it being July. The muddy handprint began to dry and fade before my eyes, disappearing completely within seconds. I don't know what possessed me, but I got up and walked toward the hallway. "I know you're there," I said. "I've always known. You don't scare me anymore." That wasn't entirely true. I was terrified, but something told me showing fear would only make things worse. As I reached the hallway, I saw her again, the same little girl from years ago, still clutching that antique doll. She stood at the far end, partially transparent but definitely there. She didn't look menacing. She looked lonely. "What's your name?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer, but she took a step toward me, then another. With each step, the lights in the hallway flickered. I held my ground, though every instinct told me to run. When she was about 5 feet away, she stopped and lifted the doll, as if offering it to me. I shook my head. "That's yours. You can keep it." A tear rolled down her pale cheek, and then she vanished. Just disappeared into thin air. The temperature returned to normal immediately, and the oppressive feeling that had filled the hallway lifted. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I slept in my own room without fear. For some reason, I felt like we'd reached an understanding, this ghost girl and I. I didn't know her story, but I somehow knew she wasn't trying to harm me. Maybe she was just trying to connect with someone, to be remembered. The next morning, I went down to the basement and found the box with the glass doll. I brought it up to my room and placed it on my shelf. It felt right somehow acknowledging her presence instead of pretending it wasn't real. When my mom noticed it later, she seemed concerned. "Are you sure you want that creepy thing in your room?" she asked. "It's not creepy," I replied. "It's just old, and I think it belongs here." After that day, the disappearances and reappearances of my belongings stopped completely. The feeling of being watched diminished, though it never fully went away. Occasionally, I'd still hear soft footsteps in the hallway when no one was there, or catch a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision, but it no longer felt threatening or scary. What's strange is that as I got older and prepared to leave for college, the activity increased again. My alarm clock would go off at random times. I'd find my packed boxes unpacked, items returned to their original places in my room. It was as if she knew I was leaving and was trying to prevent it. The night before I left for college, I woke up around 3 o'clock in the morning to find her standing at the foot of my bed. She looked exactly the same as she had that first night. Sad eyes, antique nightgown, clutching her doll. But this time, she wasn't just watching. She was crying, tears streaming silently down her face. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I have to go." Then, "But I'm not forgetting about you." She stayed there, unmoving except for the tears, until I eventually fell back asleep. When I woke in the morning, the doll that had been on my shelf was on my pillow, right next to where my head had been. I left it there when I moved out. It felt wrong to take it with me. I think she needed it more than I did. I'm 23 now, and have my own apartment in a different city. My parents still live in that house, and every time I visit, I feel her presence. She never shows herself anymore, but I know she's there. My brother, who's in high school now, sometimes mentions hearing weird noises, but he's never experienced anything like what I did. Last Christmas, I was staying in my old room and distinctly felt someone sit on the edge of my bed in the middle of the night. I wasn't scared. I just whispered, "I missed you too," and fell back asleep. I've since researched the history of the land our development was built on. The Henderson family owned the property from 1893 until 1972. Their daughter, Elizabeth, died in 1934 at age 7. She fell down a well on the property while playing. According to newspaper archives, she was clutching a beloved doll when they found her body. Sometimes I wonder if I should tell my parents the full extent of what happened, but I don't see the point in scaring them now. They've lived in that house for nearly 20 years without experiencing what I did. Whatever connection Elizabeth and I had, it was specific to me. I don't know why she chose me. Maybe I reminded her of someone, or maybe I was just the first person who could see her. All I know is that somewhere in Oak Ridge, in my parents' house, a little girl who died almost 90 years ago is still there, playing with her doll, waiting for someone to acknowledge her existence. And sometimes late at night in my apartment 300 miles away, I still wake up with a distinct feeling that I'm being watched. Some connections, it seems, don't care about distance or time, or even the barrier between life and death. Some connections just are. I've been sitting here for 2 hours trying to find the right words to type this out. My hands are still shaky, and I keep looking over my shoulder, even though I'm back at my parents' house now. I've never been the type to believe in ghosts or anything supernatural, but what happened 3 days ago in my dorm at Bradford College has completely messed with my head. For context, I'm a sophomore at Bradford, which isn't really important except for understanding why I was alone in my dorm building. The fall semester had just ended, and almost everyone had already gone home for winter break. My dad was supposed to pick me up on Saturday, but he couldn't make it until Sunday because of some work emergency, so I ended up being one of maybe 5 or 6 people left in my entire building. My dorm is kind of unusual compared to other colleges. Bradford bought this old hotel a few years back and converted it into student housing. It's actually pretty nice, bigger rooms than standard dorms, private bathrooms, and all that. But being an old hotel, it has this weird layout with long hallways that seem to go on forever, and everything echoes when it's empty. By Saturday night, the place was practically a ghost town. All my friends had left, and I was just killing time watching Netflix and packing. Around 10 at night, I realized I hadn't done laundry, and I still had a bunch of dirty clothes I needed to take home. I figured I might as well wash them since I had nothing better to do. The laundry room is in the basement, down this dimly lit stairwell that's already creepy enough during regular hours, but at night, with barely anyone around, it felt like something straight out of a horror movie. The stairs creak, the lighting flickers, and there's this weird smell like old carpet and something else I can't quite place. I stuffed all my clothes into a washing machine and headed back upstairs. My room was on the 3rd floor, which meant I had to pass through 2 floors of empty hallways. The 2nd floor was completely dark except for the emergency exit signs that cast this eerie red glow. The building is set up so some doors are always left open for air circulation or whatever, and as I walked past them, I could see into the empty rooms, beds stripped, desks cleared out, personal items gone, just empty shells waiting for next semester. I got back to my room and tried to distract myself with more Netflix, but the Wi-Fi was being super spotty since they'd already started reducing services for the break. Time was dragging, and I kept checking my phone. At exactly midnight, I remember looking at the time, I decided to go check if my clothes were ready to move to the dryer. The hallways seemed even quieter than before. You know that feeling when a place is so quiet that your own breathing sounds loud? It was like that, plus this weird pressure in my ears, like when you're on an airplane. I took the stairs down, moved my stuff to the dryer, and set it for an hour. Instead of going back to my room, I decided to wait in the small lounge area near the laundry room. There was an old vending machine that still worked, and I got a soda and played games on my phone. After about 45 minutes, I was getting bored and figured my clothes might be almost dry anyway, so I checked them, and they still needed more time. I decided to head back to my room and come back later. This is where things get weird. The main stairwell is at the center of the building, but there's also this smaller staircase at the far end that not many people use. It's closer to my room though, so I always take it. It's narrower and the lights are dimmer, but it's quicker. As I was walking down the second floor hallway toward my staircase, I passed this one room, room 237. The door was partially open, which wasn't unusual since, like I said, some doors are kept open. What caught my eye was that this room looked different from the others. One bed was completely stripped like normal, but the mattress wasn't on it. It was propped up against the wall beside the bed frame. The metal springs of the bed frame were exposed, just an empty rectangle of coils. And that's when I saw him. There was a boy sitting on the empty bed frame, right on the springs. He was wearing black basketball shorts and a black hoodie. His legs were dangling over the edge, swinging back and forth in this slow, deliberate way. His head was down, so I couldn't see his face, just the top of his hoodie. My first thought was, oh, someone else is still here. I figured maybe he was staying with whoever lived in that room, and they were just hanging out. But something felt off. Why would someone be sitting on the bare springs when the mattress was right there against the wall? It had to be uncomfortable. I slowed down as I passed the door, and that's when the feeling hit me. It was like someone had dumped a bucket of ice water down my back. I felt this overwhelming wave of dread and sadness, not fear exactly, at least not yet, but this profound, crushing sadness that wasn't mine. It felt like it was coming from him. That's also when I realized something else that made my blood run cold. The springs of that bed frame were spaced too wide for someone to sit on comfortably. They were the type that would dig into you if you tried to sit on them. And the mattress was behind him, propped against the wall. There was physically no way he could be sitting where he was without falling through. I stopped walking. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I told myself I was imagining things, that the dim lighting was playing tricks on my eyes. I blinked and looked away for just a second. When I looked back, he was gone. Completely gone. The room was empty, just the stripped bed with its mattress against the wall. I ran. I didn't even think about it. My body just reacted. I sprinted down that hallway to the staircase, took the stairs 2 at a time, and didn't stop until I reached my room. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get my key card to work. Once inside, I slammed the door shut and locked it. I sat on my bed with my back against the wall, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Had I imagined it? Was I so tired that my mind was playing tricks on me? But it had seemed so real. The way his legs swung back and forth. The fabric of his shorts moving with each swing. My phone buzzed, making me jump. It was a reminder that my laundry would be done in 10 minutes. There was no way in hell I was going back down there. My clothes could stay in the dryer until morning. I tried telling myself that I was being ridiculous, that there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe someone had been there and left really quickly. Maybe the lighting made it look like he was sitting on the springs when he was actually somewhere else. But none of these explanations felt right. The worst part was the silence. With so few people in the building, every little noise stood out. The heating system turning on made me jump. The ice machine down the hall dropping ice cubes sounded like footsteps. I could swear I heard someone walking past my door multiple times, but when I gathered the courage to peek through the peephole, the hallway was empty. I don't know how, but I must have fallen asleep eventually. I woke up around 6 o'clock in the morning, still fully dressed and sitting upright against the wall. My neck was stiff, and for a moment I thought maybe the whole thing had been a nightmare, but I knew it wasn't. The memory was too vivid, the feeling too real. I needed to get my laundry. My dad would be arriving in a few hours, and I couldn't leave without my clothes. So I took a deep breath and made myself go downstairs. The morning light was filtering through the windows now, making the place seem less threatening. I hurried downstairs, grabbed my laundry from the dryer, now cold and wrinkled, and rushed back up, deliberately taking the main staircase to avoid the second floor's hallway where room 237 was located. I was packing up my stuff when curiosity got the better of me. I needed to know if that room was real, if what I'd seen had any logical explanation. so I worked up the courage to go look at it in daylight. The door to room 237 was closed now, which was strange because I distinctly remembered it being open the night before. I stood there for a moment, debating whether to try the handle, when the door to the room across the hall opened and a girl stepped out with a suitcase. I nearly jumped out of my skin. "Hey, you still here too?" she asked, looking surprised to see another person. I nodded, trying to act normal. "Yeah, my dad's picking me up today. Do you know who lives in this room?" I pointed at 237. She frowned. "No one right now. That room's been empty all semester." "Yeah, there was a kid assigned to it, but he never showed up at the beginning of the year. Some kind of accident over the summer, I think. They never reassigned it." I wanted to ask more, but I was afraid of what I might learn. I thanked her and went back to my room, where I spent the next few hours jumping at every sound until my dad finally called to say he was outside. As we drove away from campus, I couldn't help looking back at the building, at the window I thought might belong to room 237. Part of me wanted to tell my dad what happened, but I knew how it would sound. Even I wasn't sure what to make of it. I spent the last 3 days trying to rationalize what I saw. Maybe it was just exhaustion, or my mind playing tricks in a nearly empty building. But I can't shake the feeling that what I experienced was real. That sad, swinging-legged boy in the hoodie, sitting impossibly on those bed springs. He was there, and then he wasn't. I've tried searching for information about accidents involving Bradford students over the summer, but I haven't found anything specific yet. Part of me doesn't want to know. What if I find out that a boy in a black hoodie died right before the semester started? I don't know what I saw that night. I don't know if I'll ever be able to explain it. But I do know one thing. When I go back for the spring semester, I'm requesting a different dorm building. I don't care what excuse I have to make. I'm never setting foot in that converted hotel again. I've been holding this in for 20 years now. I still get goosebumps thinking about it, and I've only told a handful of people face to face. Most think I'm making it up, or that we were all just tired and seeing things. But I know what I saw, and after meeting others who experienced the same thing, I'm convinced something unexplainable happened out there. I was a Lance Corporal with the British Army, deployed as part of the coalition forces in Iraq back in 2003. This was just after the initial invasion, when things were starting to get messy. My unit was based near Basra, and we'd regularly patrol Highway 80, the main road connecting Kuwait City to Basra. If you don't know about Highway 80, it has a nickname, the Highway of Death. During the first Gulf War in '91, coalition forces absolutely decimated retreating Iraqi military convoys on this stretch of road. Fighter jets and helicopters just rained hell down on them as they tried to flee back to Baghdad. Between 1,400 and 2,000 people died that night. Burned-out vehicles stayed there for years afterward. Tanks, trucks, civilian cars, all just abandoned in the desert with human remains still inside some of them. By the time I got there, most had been cleared, but you could still see the occasional rusted wreck half buried in the sand if you looked carefully. It was early November, around 9 at night. The temperature had dropped to maybe 15 degrees Celsius, which felt cold after the scorching days. The night was clear. I remember looking up and seeing more stars than I'd ever seen before. The desert sky is something else. No light pollution, just this massive dome of stars above you. Our patrol got a call to help recover a Warrior armored vehicle that had broken down about 40 kilometers northeast of the Kuwait border. Standard procedure: one unit stays with a broken vehicle while another comes to help. When we arrived, we found 4 guys standing around our Warrior, looking bored and smoking. The vehicle had some kind of transmission issue, and they'd been waiting nearly 3 hours for us to arrive. Our job was to provide additional security while the recovery team got to work. My sergeant, Davis, ordered me and 5 others to set up a perimeter around the vehicle. The highway itself was 6 lanes wide, 3 in each direction, with about 50 m of flat, sandy ground on either side before the desert proper began. We spread out in a rough circle, maybe 75 m in diameter, with a broken-down Warrior in the center. I was positioned on the eastern side, facing away from the road into the darkness of the desert. We had night vision goggles, but I wasn't using mine yet, trying to preserve battery life. The moon provided just enough light to see the immediate area around me. The desert was dead quiet except for the occasional crackle of our radios and the distant sound of the recovery team working on the vehicle. About 20 minutes into our watch, I noticed something moving in my peripheral vision, maybe 100 meters out into the desert. At first, I thought it was just shadows playing tricks on me. The desert at night is weird like that. The sand reflects moonlight in ways that can mess with your perception. But then I saw it again, a definite movement, like someone walking parallel to the highway. I raised my SA-80 rifle and looked through the SUSAT scope, but I couldn't see anything clearly. I decided to use my night vision. When I flipped them down, I immediately spotted what looked like a person walking slowly about 100 meters away. The figure was hunched over, moving with a strange gait, almost shambling. "I've got movement, bearing 090, approximately 100 m, I reported into my radio. Davis responded immediately. "Thompson, are you sure? What do you see exactly?" "Looks like a person, Sarge, moving slowly alone." Before he could reply, Jenkins, who was positioned to my right about 30 m away, cut in. "I see it too. And there's another one behind it." At this point, my heart rate picked up. We were in hostile territory, and unknown persons approaching our position was never good news. It could be insurgents planning an attack, or it could be civilians. Either way, we needed to identify them. Davis ordered, "Thompson, Jenkins, Fuller, move forward and investigate." Everyone else maintained the perimeter. The three of us moved cautiously toward where we'd seen the figures. We spread out in a small wedge formation, using proper tactics, moving slowly and deliberately. As we approached the area, I could no longer see any movement. We got to approximately where I'd seen the figure, but there was nothing there. Just flat sand with the occasional rock or scrub brush. Spread out 5-meter intervals, checked the ground, ordered Fuller, who was the corporal in charge of our little investigation team. We searched methodically for about 5 minutes but found nothing. No footprints in the sand, no disturbed areas, nothing. I was starting to think I'd imagined it when Jenkins called us over. "Look at this," he said, kneeling in the sand. What he'd found was an old Iraqi military helmet, partially buried in the sand. Next to it was a tattered piece of cloth that might have once been a uniform. The helmet had a hole in it the size of a .50 cal round, I guess. There was a dark stain inside that could only have been blood, long since dried and caked with sand. "Gulf War casualty," Fuller said quietly. "Must have been thrown clear when their vehicle got hit." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the night air. I've been walking over a battlefield where thousands had died. Somehow, finding this tangible evidence made it all more real. "Let's head back," Fuller said. "Nothing out here but ghosts." As we turned to walk back to our positions, I swear I saw movement again, this time from the corner of my eye, maybe 50 m to our north. I spun around, raising my rifle, but saw nothing. "Did you see that?" I asked. Both Fuller and Jenkins looked where I was pointing. Jenkins nodded slowly. "I saw something move," he confirmed, "but it's gone now." We radioed back to Davis about what we'd found, just the helmet and rag, nothing to explain the movement we'd seen. He ordered us back to the perimeter. When we returned, the recovery operation was still ongoing. The mechanic was saying it would take at least another 20 minutes to get the Warrior operational enough to tow. I resumed my position, feeling on edge now. Every shadow seemed to move. Every slight noise from the desert grabbed my attention. About 10 minutes after returning to my post, I saw them again. Not one figure this time, but several, maybe 5 or 6, moving about 200 m out, parallel to the highway. Through my night vision, they looked like people walking slowly, some limping, some moving in unnatural ways. Multiple contacts, same bearing as before, 200 m, I reported, trying to keep my voice steady. This time, it wasn't just me and Jenkins. Nearly everyone on the perimeter reported seeing figures moving in the desert around us. Davis ordered no one to leave the perimeter this time, but to maintain visual contact and report any approach. What happened over the next 20 minutes still gives me nightmares. The figures never approached us directly. They would appear, walk in odd patterns, sometimes seeming to drag themselves, then disappear. They'd reappeared elsewhere, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away. Through my night vision, I could make out what looked like military uniforms on some of them, civilian clothes on others. Their movements were wrong, jerky, uncoordinated, like marionettes with half their strings cut. At one point, I swear I saw a figure that appeared to be missing its lower half, dragging itself along the sand using its arms. Another seemed to be carrying something in its arms, something about the size of a child. When I reported this, Davis told me to shut up and focus on any actual threats. The recovery team working in the center of our perimeter couldn't see what was happening. They were focused on the warrior, with bright work lights illuminating their immediate area. Only those of us on the perimeter, staring out into the darkness, could see the figures moving around us. Wilkins, who was positioned on the opposite side of the perimeter, suddenly fired 3 rounds into the desert. The sharp crack of his rifle shattered the night silence. "Contact approaching, didn't respond to challenge," he shouted over the radio. Davis was furious, demanding to know exactly what Wilkins had seen. Wilkins swore that a figure had approached to within 30 meters of his position, moving quickly, and hadn't stopped when he'd shouted the challenge. 3 of us rushed over to Wilkins' position. We searched the area where he claimed to have seen the figure, in the direction he'd fired. Nothing. No blood, no body, not even footprints in the sand. Just 3 bullet casings from Wilkins' rifle. By this point, even Davis was unsettled. He'd initially thought we were just jumpy, seeing things that weren't there, but now he was scanning the darkness himself, his expression tense. 2 minutes until we're mobile, the recovery team leader announced over the radio. Everyone prepared to mount up. Those 2 minutes felt like 2 hours. The figures continued their bizarre dance around our perimeter, appearing, disappearing, reappearing elsewhere, always just at the edge of clear visibility, never quite distinct enough to make out facial features or details, but unmistakably human-shaped. Finally, the warrior's engine roared to life. We pulled back to the vehicles quickly, maintaining our defensive posture. As I climbed into our Land Rover, I took one last look out into the desert. The figures were still there, still moving, but now they seemed to be watching us. Dozens of them, spread out in a wide semicircle, all turned toward our vehicles, not approaching, just watching. The drive back to base was completely silent. Nobody talked about what we'd seen. It wasn't until the next morning that Jenkins approached me in the mess tent. "You saw them too, right?" he asked quietly. "The people in the desert?" I nodded. "Yeah, everyone did." "Not everyone," he said. "I talked to the recovery team. They didn't see anything. And Davis is saying it was just shadows and us being paranoid." Over the following weeks, our experience became something of an unspoken secret among those of us who'd been on the perimeter that night. We didn't discuss it with others, fearing ridicule or questions about our mental fitness. But among ourselves, we knew what we'd seen. 3 months later, I was transferred to another unit. During a joint patrol briefing, I met an American Marine who'd been deployed to the same area. Over cigarettes, he mentioned something about the weird stuff on Highway 80. My blood ran cold. "What weird stuff?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He looked around to make sure no one else was listening closely. "The ghosts, man. The ghosts of all those Iraqi soldiers and civilians who got wasted during the Highway of Death." My unit was doing a night patrol about 10 kilometers from the Kuwait border, and we saw them walking around in the desert. Command says it's just locals or smugglers, but locals don't just vanish into thin air when you go to check them out. Over the years, I've met at least 7 other military personnel, British, American, even one Polish Special Forces guy, who had similar experiences along that same stretch of Highway 80. Always at night. Always the same description. Figures that move in unnatural ways, that appear and disappear, that can never be found when investigated. I'm not a superstitious person. Before that night, I'd have laughed at anyone who talked about ghosts or spirits. But I know what I saw. We all did. Those weren't insurgents or civilians or tricks of the light. They were the dead of the Highway of Death, still wandering the desert where their lives had been violently ended. Sometimes I wonder if they're still there, dragging themselves through the sand, watching as new military vehicles pass by on that same highway. I wonder if they recognize us as the same forces that killed them, or if they're just lost souls repeating their final moments for eternity. Whatever the explanation, I know one thing for certain: something supernatural happened on Highway 80 that night. And no matter how many people tell me it was just my imagination or stress or fatigue, I'm no different. Because you don't imagine something that an entire patrol witnesses simultaneously. And you don't hallucinate bullet holes and helmets buried in the sand. I left the Army 5 years after that incident, but that night has stayed with me. Some nights, when I close my eyes, I can still see them, shambling figures in the desert, forever walking but never arriving, trapped in the place where they died. I still can't believe I'm typing this out. My hands are shaking so bad, I keep having to backspace and correct mistakes. I guess I need to get this down somewhere before I completely lose it. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar or can tell me I'm not going insane. 2 months ago, I finally moved into my first apartment in Clearwater. I'm 23, and living with my parents was driving me crazy. Don't get me wrong, they're great people, but their house had so many rules. No friends after 9, constant questions about where I was going, when I'd be back, typical overprotective parent stuff. I'd saved up for almost a year working at this marketing firm downtown, and when I found a 1-bedroom apartment for a decent price, I jumped on it. The apartment complex isn't anything special, just a 2-story building with about 16 units. Mine is on the 2nd floor, apartment 2C. When I first walked in after signing the lease, I was so excited I could barely contain myself. It wasn't huge, but it was mine. I spent that entire first weekend painting the living room a soft blue color and hanging up string lights around the windows. I bought plants. I arranged and rearranged my furniture probably 15 times. For the first time in my life, I felt like an actual adult. The first week was perfect. I'd wake up whenever I wanted, leave dishes in the sink if I felt lazy, blast music while I got ready for work. Nobody telling me to turn it down or clean up. Total freedom. I remember calling my best friend Mia and just rambling about how amazing independence felt. Then things started to get weird. It began with my keys. I always put them in this little ceramic dish I keep on the kitchen counter. It's a habit I've had forever. But one morning, they weren't there. I figured I must have been distracted when I came home and set them somewhere else. After 20 minutes of searching and nearly being late for work, I found them on the floor by the fridge. Weird, but not impossible. I assumed they'd fallen somehow. But then it happened again the next day, and the day after. My keys weren't just on the floor. They were inside my refrigerator, sitting on top of the butter container. I live alone. There's no way I put them there. I remember standing there, staring at my keys, trying to remember if I'd grabbed something from the fridge when I got home, but I hadn't. I'd ordered takeout. I called Mia that night, trying to laugh it off. "I think I'm losing my mind already," I joked. "Next thing you know, I'll be the crazy lady who forgets to wear pants to the grocery store." She laughed and suggested I might be more stressed about living alone than I realized. I agreed that made sense. A few days passed without incident, and I started to relax. Then I came home from work to find every single cabinet door in the kitchen standing open. Every single one. I know for a fact I didn't leave them that way. Nobody else has a key except the building manager, and why would he come in just to open my cabinets? I checked to see if anything was missing, but everything seemed to be in place. I closed all the doors, double-checked that my front door was locked, and tried to shake off the uneasiness crawling up my spine. That night was when it really started, though. The thing that's making me type this with trembling fingers. I woke up around 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm not sure what pulled me from sleep. Maybe a noise, maybe just that feeling you get when something isn't right. My bedroom was dark, except for the faint glow of the street light outside filtering through my blinds. The first thing I noticed was that my closet door was open. I always close it before bed because open closets freak me out at night. Always have. But there it was, standing open about halfway, and from inside I could hear breathing. Raspy, wet breathing, like someone with congestion trying to breathe quietly. I froze. Complete deer in headlights froze. Couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't even blink. I just lay there listening to the breathing coming from my closet, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack a rib. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I managed to reach over and turn on my bedside lamp. The breathing stopped immediately. I stared at the closet, trying to gather the courage to get up and check it. Eventually I did, holding my phone with 911 already dialed, just waiting for me to press call. There was nothing there. Just my clothes and shoes, exactly as I'd left them. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat on my couch with all the lights on until morning, telling myself I dreamed it, or it was the pipes or the neighbors through the wall. Anything but what it felt like. The next few days were quiet, and I started to convince myself it had been my imagination. I even laughed about it with coworkers over lunch. First-time apartment jitters, I called it. Then came the night I heard the creaking under my bed. It started as soft little squeaks, like someone shifting their weight on an old floorboard. I was reading on my phone before sleeping when I first noticed it. I held my breath and listened. Creak, pause, creak. Then a soft thump, like a hand pressing against the underside of my mattress. I shot up and out of bed so fast I nearly passed out from the head rush. Standing on shaky legs in the middle of my room, I watched as the creaking stopped. Then the most horrifying sound started, a wet gurgling noise, like someone choking on liquid. I ran out of my bedroom and slept on the couch again, if you can call staring wide-eyed at the ceiling until dawn sleeping. In the morning light, I forced myself to look under the bed. Nothing. Not a single thing out of place. I began to wonder if there was something wrong with the apartment. Maybe there was a gas leak making me hallucinate. I called maintenance, but they found nothing. I even asked the guy if any previous tenants had mentioned strange noises. He just shrugged and said the woman before me had moved out suddenly, but he didn't know why. That's when the shadows started moving wrong. You know how shadows are supposed to behave? They follow the laws of light and physics. These didn't. They'd stretch when nothing was moving. They'd shrink back suddenly, like something pulling away from the light. One evening, I was washing dishes and glanced up to see my shadow on the kitchen wall. Except it wasn't doing what I was doing. Its head was tilted at an impossible angle, like someone had broken its neck. I dropped the plate and it shattered. When I looked back, my shadow was normal again. The worst was the figure in my doorway. The first time I saw it, I'd woken up around 2 a.m. There was something standing in my bedroom doorway, just a dark silhouette, completely still. I couldn't make out any features, just a human-shaped blackness, darker than the darkness around it. I squeezed my eyes shut, counted to 10, and when I opened them, it was gone. The next night, it was there again, only this time it was a few steps into my room. The night after, it was halfway to my bed. Each night, it got closer. I started sleeping with my light on, but that only made the shadows it cast more terrifying. Last week, things escalated drastically. I came home from work to find my bedroom door, which I had definitely locked before leaving, another new habit broken open. The wood around the lock was splintered like someone had forced it, but my front door was still locked and intact. There were wet footprints leading from my bathroom to the side of my bed. Not water. They were too viscous, too dark. They didn't dry or evaporate. They just disappeared while I was staring at them. The next morning, there was an antique silver hairbrush on my bathroom sink. It wasn't mine. I've never seen it before in my life. When I picked it up, it was damp to the touch, like someone had just used it with wet hair. I threw it in the dumpster behind the building on my way to work, hands shaking the whole time. When I came home, it was back on the sink. Wet again. The whispers started 3 days ago. They come from inside the walls. Quiet at first, like distant conversation, but getting louder. I can't make out all the words, but I hear my name sometimes. And stay. And mine. I couldn't take it anymore. Yesterday, I packed an overnight bag and went to Mia's house. I didn't tell her everything, just that my apartment was having plumbing issues and maintenance needed me out for a night. I was so relieved to be somewhere else, somewhere normal. We watched a movie, had some wine, and for a few hours I felt safe again. until I woke up in her guest room at 4 o'clock in the morning to find wet footprints beside the bed. And her cat, which had been sleeping on the foot of my bed, was soaking wet and trembling. I left before Mia woke up. I couldn't put her in danger, too. I drove back to my apartment, determined to grab more of my stuff and find a hotel until I could break my lease. The moment I walked in, I knew something was different. The air felt heavy, like before a thunderstorm. The hair on my arm stood up. In the bathroom, written in condensation on the mirror were the words, "Don't fight it." Nobody had showered. The bathroom was cold, not steamy. My bed was soaked through, the sheets, the comforter, the mattress itself, all drenched in what smelled like stagnant water. In the center was that damn hairbrush. I ran out and haven't been back since. I'm sitting in my car in a Target parking lot right now, typing this out, trying to figure out what to do. I can't go home to my parents. Whatever this is, I don't want it following me there. I don't want to endanger anyone else. Oh, God. I just looked up at my apartment window. I can see it from here, and there's a shadow watching me. I can make out the shape of a head, shoulders. It's not moving, just watching. I don't know what to do. I think whatever has claimed my apartment doesn't want me to leave. And I think it's gradually taking possession of me, too. My hair has been damp when I wake up, even though I haven't showered. My skin feels clammy all the time. Sometimes I catch myself standing still, staring at nothing, with no memory of how long I've been there. This morning, I found myself in front of the bathroom mirror, brush in hand, with no memory of how I got there. I need help. I don't know what's happening. I don't know what to do. Whatever this is, it's getting stronger, and I'm getting weaker. It feels like it's seeping into me day by day, like water slowly rising. I'm going to drive somewhere else now. The shadow hasn't moved from my window, but I swear it's somehow gotten closer, even though it hasn't changed position. That doesn't make sense. I know none of this makes sense. I'll update if I can, but my phone battery is already showing signs of water damage, which is impossible because it hasn't been near water. The screen keeps flickering, and there are droplets forming under the glass. I just wanted my own place. I just wanted independence. Now I'm terrified that I'll never really be alone again. I'm not normally one to share personal experiences online, but this has been haunting me for years now, and I just need to get it out there. Maybe someone has an explanation, or maybe someone else has experienced something like it. Either way, I can't keep it bottled up anymore. This happened about 7 years ago, during my senior year of high school. I lived with my mom and younger sister in a small town called Willow Creek. It's not even really a town, more like a collection of houses scattered near a highway, surrounded by dense woods. We were about 20 minutes from Fairfield Military Base, which is important to mention because I've always wondered if what happened had something to do with military testing or something. Our house sat on about 2 acres of land, mostly grass, with forest wrapping around 3 sides of the property. The nearest neighbor was about half a mile down the road. We weren't totally isolated, but it definitely wasn't suburban living. There was an old Baptist church across the highway, maybe a quarter mile from our place. That particular day had started off completely normal. It was late October, and my sister Amber was having her senior photos taken. Mom had set up this backdrop in our yard, one of those fabric things with autumn leaves painted on it. Our cousin Melissa was a photographer, so she came over to take the pictures instead of us having to pay for a professional. The photo shoot went fine. Amber got all dressed up, did all those typical senior poses, and by around 5 o'clock, we were finishing up. The weather had started to turn. Nothing severe, just a light, misty rain that made everything damp. My mom, Jane, and I were taking down the backdrop while Amber went inside to change clothes and check out the photos with Melissa on her laptop. That's when we first heard it. At first, it was so faint that I barely noticed, a soft melodic singing coming from somewhere in the direction of the woods behind our property. I remember pausing while folding the backdrop, my hands freezing mid-task. "Do you hear that?" I asked my mom. She stopped what she was doing and tilted her head. Probably just the church choir practicing. Sound carries weird in this weather. That made sense. The Baptist church sometimes had evening choir practice, and sound does travel oddly when it's misty out. So I went back to folding, but I couldn't shake this feeling that something wasn't right about the singing. The thing is, it wasn't a song I recognized. No lyrics, just a simple melody of about 4 to 6 notes that repeated over and over. The tune was weirdly beautiful, but also unsettling, like something you'd hear in a dream. And it didn't sound like a church choir. There was something too perfect about it. As we continued picking things up, the singing gradually became louder, not dramatically, just steadily increasing in volume as if whatever was making the sound was slowly moving closer to our property. "Mom, I really don't think that's the church," I said, trying to keep my voice casual, even though I was starting to feel uneasy. She paused again, listening more intently this time. "You're right. That's coming from the woods." We both turned toward the tree lean, which was about 100 yards from where we stood. The rain was picking up a bit, making soft pattering sounds on the leaves and grass. The day was getting darker earlier because of the cloud cover, and the forest looked like a solid wall of blackness. "Maybe some kids are out there," I suggested, but even as I said it, I knew that made no sense. The woods behind our house didn't have any paths or clearings where people would hang out, and these weren't kid voices. That's when I started to really notice the strangest thing about the singing. It sounded like one voice, but also like many voices at the same time. It wasn't a group of different people singing together. It was like hearing a single voice that had been perfectly copied 20 times over, all singing in flawless unison. I can't explain it any better than that. It wasn't male or female. It existed in some uncanny middle ground that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "Let's just get this stuff inside," my mom said, her voice tense. She was clearly feeling the same unease I was. We quickly gathered the rest of the photography equipment, but as we worked, the singing continued to get louder, and it seemed to be moving. At first, it had been coming directly from the woods behind the house, but now it felt like it was spreading, moving along the tree lean toward the side of our property. My mom and I kept exchanging glances, not saying much. I think we both were trying not to freak each other out, but the dread was building inside me with each repetition of that eerie melody. It was like whatever was making the sound was circling our property. By the time we got everything packed up, the daylight was almost completely gone. The only illumination came from our porch light and the dim glow from the kitchen windows. The singing had grown so loud that it seemed to fill the air around us. What had started as something you had to strain to hear was now impossible to ignore. It dominated every other sound. "Mom," I whispered, clutching the folded backdrop to my chest. "What is that?" She shook her head, her face pale, even in the dim light. "I don't know, Lisa. Let's just get inside." That's when we both realized something that sent ice through my veins. The singing was no longer just coming from the woods behind our house. It was coming from all the woods, from every direction around our property. Whatever was making that sound had completely surrounded us. I've heard stories about the woods around Willow Creek. There were rumors about cult activity back in the 80s, and some people swear they've seen strange lights out there at night. I'd always brushed those stories off as small-town gossip, but standing there in our yard with that impossible singing surrounding us, those old tales suddenly felt very real. The melody just kept repeating those same haunting notes over and over, and the voices, God, those voices, they sounded almost hungry, like they were calling to us specifically. I know that sounds crazy, but that's how it felt in that moment. Then something changed. The singing, which had been maintaining a distance at the edge of woods, suddenly seemed to move closer. It was like whatever was making the sound had taken a synchronized step out from the tree lean and toward our house. That broke the spell. My mom grabbed my arm so hard it hurt. Inside. Now, we're in. I don't even remember dropping the backdrop, but I must have, because my hands were empty as we sprinted across the yard toward the back door. The rain was falling harder now, soaking through my t-shirt and making the ground slippery under my feet. The whole time, that singing followed us, growing impossibly louder with each step we took. It felt like it was right behind us, breathing down our necks with that perfect and human harmony. We burst through the back door into the kitchen, slamming it shut behind us and locking it immediately. Mom leaned against the door, breathing hard, her eyes wild. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, dripping rainwater onto the floor, my whole body shaking. Amber and Melissa were sitting at the dining table, looking at us like we were insane. "What's wrong with you guys?" Amber asked, laughing a little. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Don't you hear that?" I demanded, my voice coming out higher than normal. "The singing." They both looked confused. Melissa got up and came over to us, concern replacing her initial amusement. "What's singing? We don't hear anything." Mom and I exchanged a look of disbelief. How could they not hear it? It was so loud that it should have been audible even through the walls of the house. I went to the kitchen window and pulled back the curtain. The yard was dark now, the rain coming down steadily. I couldn't see anything moving out there, but the singing was still going, still surrounding the house from all directions. "There," I said, pointing out the window. "Listen, it's coming from everywhere." Amber and Melissa came to stand beside me, both of them wearing identical expressions of concern. "Lisa, there's nothing," Amber said gently. "No singing, just rain." "That's impossible." My mom cut in, joining us at the window. "It's right there. How can you not hear it?" But they insisted they couldn't. I watched their faces carefully, looking for any sign that they were messing with us, but they seemed genuinely confused and increasingly worried. Melissa suggested that maybe we were both hearing things because of stress or exhaustion. Mom had been working double shifts at the hospital, and I'd been staying up late studying for exams. It was a reasonable explanation, except for one major problem. We were both hearing the exact same thing. For the next hour, the singing continued. Mom and I stayed in the kitchen, unwilling to go into other parts of the house where we might be closer to the windows. Melissa and Amber tried to distract us, making coffee and talking about the photos, but I could barely focus on what they were saying. All I could think about was that melody repeating over and over, the voices reaching a crescendo that seemed like it would never end. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the singing stopped. The silence hit me like a physical force. 1 second the air was filled with that unearthly chorus, and the next, nothing. Just the normal sounds of the house and the rain outside. Mom and I both noticed it at the same time. We looked at each other, both of us holding our breath, waiting to see if it would start again. But it didn't. Whatever had surrounded our house, whatever had been singing that bizarre melody, was gone. Melissa left about an hour later when the rain let up. She clearly thought we had both experienced some kind of shared hallucination or panic attack. Amber was worried too, but more sympathetic. She suggested that maybe we'd heard some kind of unusual animal sound and our minds had turned it into singing. But I know what I heard. It wasn't an animal or the wind or some kind of acoustic phenomenon caused by the rain. It was voices, perfectly matched, perfectly synchronized voices, singing a melody that no human choir could produce with such precision. In the years since, I've tried to find explanations. I've researched everything from mass hysteria to infrasound to military experiments. I've talked to locals about the history of the woods around Willow Creek, looking for any clues about what might have been out there that night. There are stories, of course. Every small town has them, tales about the forest people who supposedly live deep in the woods beyond where normal hikers would go. Stories about experiments at the military base that went wrong in the 70s. But nothing that would explain what my mom and I experienced. The strangest part is that my mom and I have never heard the singing again, even though we still live in the same house. Sometimes when it rains in the evening and the light starts to fade, I'll find myself listening for it, half expecting to hear those notes drifting from the tree line. But it never comes back. I don't go near those woods anymore. Not ever, and neither does my mom. We've never really talked about it much since it happened. It's like we both understand that putting it into words somehow makes it more real, more terrifying. I still don't know what was in those woods that day. I don't know why only my mom and I could hear it, or why it surrounded our property before disappearing. And I don't know why 7 years later, I still sometimes wake up in the middle of the night with that melody playing in my head, those perfect voices calling me from the edge of my dreams. All I know is that something was out there, something that wasn't human. And sometimes I can't shake the feeling that it's still there, waiting in the woods, singing its strange song and waiting for someone to follow the melody into the darkness. I never believed in the paranormal. My wife Eliza did, but I always dismissed her ghost stories as nothing more than imagination or coincidences with logical explanations. I'm a mechanical engineer by trade, so I naturally look for rational solutions to problems. But what happened in our cottage in Thornfield has shaken my entire worldview, and I still can't explain it. We bought the old blacksmith's cottage last spring. It was our dream home, a charming stone building from the early 1700s with thick walls, exposed wooden beams, and a proper fireplace. The estate agent mentioned its history as we toured it the first time. It had been the village blacksmith's home and workshop for almost 2 centuries before being converted to a purely residential property in the 1920s. The cottage sat at the edge of Thornfield, a tiny village about 20 miles from York. It was perfect, quiet, picturesque, with just the right amount of isolation. We've been living in Leeds for years, both of us commuting to our jobs, dealing with the noise and stress of city life. This was our escape, our reward for years of saving. Eliza could work remotely as a graphic designer, and I'd found a position at an engineering firm just a half-hour drive away. Moving day went smoothly. The previous owners had left the place spotless, and by nightfall, we had our bedrooms set up enough to sleep there. We were exhausted but happy, celebrating with takeaway and a bottle of wine on our mattress before properly making the bed. That first night is when it started. It was around 11 at night when Eliza pulled back our duvet to get into bed. She let out a small gasp, and I looked over to see what had startled her. There, in the center of our queen-size mattress, sat a metal screw. It was perfectly positioned, as if someone had deliberately placed it there. "Did you put this here?" she asked, picking it up. I hadn't. It was about an inch long, silver with a Phillips head, completely ordinary except for its unexplained presence on our bed. We just put fresh sheets on the mattress. There was no way it had been there before. "Maybe it fell out of one of the boxes," I suggested, though none of our boxes had been opened anywhere near the bed. We dismissed it as odd but not concerning. Moving is chaotic. Things get misplaced, items appear where you don't remember putting them. We tossed the screw into my toolbox and thought nothing more of it. 3 days later, Eliza was upstairs in the spare room unpacking her art supplies when she felt something drop onto her shoulder. It was another screw, identical to the first. She was alone in the room. I was downstairs sorting out the kitchen. The ceiling above was solid plaster, with no visible fixtures where a screw could have come from. When she called me upstairs to show me, I searched the ceiling carefully. Nothing was loose, nothing was missing any screws. The windows were closed. There was absolutely no explanation for where it had come from. It literally appeared out of nowhere. "Marcus," Eliza said, "I felt it drop onto my shoulder." I still try to rationalize it. Old houses settle. Maybe it was lodged somewhere in the beams and just worked its way loose. But I knew it didn't make sense. The screw looked new, no dust, no signs of age. The third incident happened a week after we'd moved in. Eliza had taken a shower and reached for her dressing gown. As she put her hand in the pocket, she felt something metal, another screw. She swore she'd checked the pockets before hanging up the robe, and I believed her. She's meticulous about checking pockets after once ruining a favorite lipstick in a wash. By this point, we found 5 screws in total. Each appearance was impossible to explain, and they were starting to unnerve us. Maybe the place is haunted, Eliza suggested one evening over dinner. The blacksmith's ghost? I laughed it off, but without much conviction. Ghosts don't leave hardware supplies lying around. How would you know? Maybe this one does. We began keeping a log of the appearances. Within 2 weeks, we collected 15 screws. They varied slightly. Most were modern Phillips head screws of different sizes, but a few looked older, with flat heads and a darker patina. The incidents became more brazen, more impossible to rationalize. I was outside checking the guttering after a heavy storm, standing on a ladder, when I noticed something odd on the roof tile directly above my head. It was a screw, balanced perfectly on the curved surface of the tile. It defied physics. There was no way it should have stayed balanced there, especially after the wind and rain we just had. While Eliza was wallpapering the living room, she turned away to mix more paste. When she looked back just seconds later, a screw was sitting an inch from where she'd been working. Neither of us had heard anything fall. One morning, I walked barefoot across our kitchen floor, going from the refrigerator to the sink, a distance of maybe 6 feet. On my return journey, I stepped on something sharp. A screw was lying on the tile directly in my path. It had not been there seconds earlier when I'd crossed the same spot. We were both approaching 40 with no children who might be playing elaborate pranks. We hadn't told any of our new neighbors about the strange occurrences. The estate agent had mentioned the previous owners had moved to Australia, hardly close enough to be sneaking in and planting screws. The most disturbing incident happened about a month after we'd moved in. I was alone in the house. Eliza had gone to visit her sister for the weekend. I was watching television in the living room, sprawled on the sofa, when I heard a faint sound above me. Not so much a sound as a feeling, a disturbance in the air. I looked up just in time to see it happen. About 6 feet above me, a metal screw materialized in midair. It literally appeared from nothing. One moment, empty space, the next, a solid object. It dropped straight down and landed by my foot with a tiny clink on the wooden floor. I sat there, frozen, my heart pounding. There was no trick of the light, no hallucination. I had watched a solid object appear from thin air. That's when I truly started to feel afraid. Until then, the screws had been odd, unexplainable, but somehow not threatening. Now I felt a deep unease take root in me. What else could materialize? What forces were we dealing with? When Eliza returned, I told her what I'd seen. She didn't seem surprised. "I've been doing some research," she said. The blacksmith who built this place was known for his metalworks. People came from all around for his craftsmanship. And now he's making screws appear from nowhere? I asked skeptically. Not exactly. But I found something interesting in the local historical society records online. His name was Thomas Harrow, and he died in 1742. According to accounts from that time, he was working on some special commission, something important, but he died before finishing it. Supposedly from a fever. What does that have to do with screws appearing in our house nearly 300 years later? I don't know, but there's more. In the 1920s, when they converted this place from a workshop to a purely residential home, the owners reported finding tools and metal pieces in strange places, items that would appear in rooms they just cleaned or in walls they were renovating. I sat heavily on our sofa. So we're not the first. No. And get this, the family who lived here in the 1960s reported finding small metal objects throughout the house. They eventually moved because the wife became convinced the place was haunted. Their descriptions match what we're experiencing. The screws continue to appear, sometimes daily, sometimes with gaps of a few days. We started keeping them in a jar on our mantelpiece. After 2 months, we had collected 47 screws of varying sizes and apparent ages. I began measuring and cataloging them, looking for patterns. Most were between 1/2 inch and 2 inches long. Some were clearly modern, others looked hand-forged. A few were so old and unique that I suspected they might actually date back to the 18th century. We considered moving, but we put everything we had into this place. Besides, the phenomena wasn't harmful, just deeply unsettling. We even tried to communicate, speaking aloud to Thomas Harrow, asking him what he wanted or what we could do to help. No response came except more screws. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a Tuesday in autumn, around 4 months after we'd moved in. I'd taken the day off work to wait for a furniture delivery. Eliza was upstairs working in her office. I was in the kitchen making tea when I heard a strange metallic rattling from the cellar. Our cellar was small and mainly used for storage. The estate agent had mentioned it was part of the original blacksmith's workshop. We'd cleaned it out but hadn't done much with it yet. The sound continued, a distinct metallic tapping. I opened the cellar door and switched on the light. The tapping stopped immediately. "Hello?" I called down, feeling foolish. Silence. I descended the stone steps, tea forgotten. The cellar was cool and smelled of earth and old stone. Our boxes were stacked neatly against one wall. Nothing seemed disturbed. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A section of the stone wall that looked slightly different from the rest. The mortar between the stones seemed fresher, less aged than the surrounding area. I stepped closer. running my fingers over the stones. They felt loose. Using a screwdriver from my pocket, I'd taken to carrying one everywhere. I probed between the stones. The mortar crumbled easily. After about 20 minutes of careful work, I managed to remove 3 stones, revealing a small cavity behind. Inside was a metal box, about the size of a thick book, covered in centuries of dust. My hands were shaking as I pulled it out. It was heavier than it looked, made of iron with crude but intricate decorative work on its surface. It was locked, but the mechanism was simple. I found that one of the screws from our collection, one of the older, hand-forged ones, fit perfectly into the keyhole. With a turn, the lid opened. Inside was a collection of metalwork tools, miniature in size but exquisitely crafted. They looked like the tools a blacksmith would use but scaled down, as if for delicate, precise work. Alongside them lay a yellowed parchment, folded multiple times. I carefully unfolded it. The handwriting was faded but legible, written in an old-fashioned script. To whoever finds this box, I leave my finest tools and my unfinished commission. My fever grows worse, and I fear I shall not see morning. Lord Thornfield's clockwork masterpiece remains incomplete. The mechanism requires specialized screws, which I had begun to forge. I cannot bear that my life's greatest work shall remain unfinished. May these tools find worthy hands. It was signed Thomas Harrow and dated April 1742. Beneath the tools was another compartment containing dozens of hand-forged screws, identical to many of the ones that had been appearing around our house. I called Eliza downstairs, and we examined the contents together. As we handled the tools, the air in the cellar seemed to change, becoming lighter somehow, as if a pressure had been released. That evening, we placed the box on our mantelpiece, next to the jar of screws. We discussed what to do, whether to contact a museum or a historian, whether the Lord Thornfield mentioned might have descendants in the area. We went to bed with no answers, but for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace about our strange situation. The next morning, I woke to find Eliza already up and downstairs. I found her standing in front of the mantelpiece, staring at the jar of screws. "They're gone," she said quietly. The jar that had contained 47 screws was empty. The iron box remained, but when we opened it, we found all the screws we collected had been added to those already inside, arranged neatly by size and type. Since that day, no more screws have appeared in our house. Sometimes I think I hear the faint sound of metal tapping from the cellar, but when I check, all is quiet. We still have the box and the tools. Sometimes I take them out and wonder about Thomas Harrow and his unfinished masterpiece. What was Lord Thornfield's clockwork commission? Why was it so important to him that his spirit lingered for centuries, collecting and creating the screws he needed? We may never know the full story, but in a strange way, I've come to feel that we were meant to find that box, to provide some resolution to a craftsman who couldn't bear to leave his work unfinished. The screws have stopped appearing, but I still find myself checking my pockets, looking at the floor before I step, and glancing at the ceiling now and then, half expecting to see a screw materialize from thin air. Some nights I swear I can hear the distant sound of a hammer on metal coming from somewhere deep within the walls of our centuries-old cottage. I never wanted to talk about this for years, but I think I'm ready to share it now. It's been over a decade since we moved into that house, and sometimes I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about it. I'm 27 now, but I was just 14 when it all started. My dad inherited this old Victorian house from his great-uncle who had passed away. It was built in 1903, all Gothic-looking, with these intricate wooden details around the windows and doors, the kind of place that looks beautiful in photographs but feels oppressive when you're actually standing in it. It had been in our family for generations, but nobody had lived in it for a few years before we moved in. We were excited at first. My parents had been renting a small house in Columbus, and this was our chance to own something. Plus, the house was huge compared to where we'd been living. 3 stories including an attic, 5 bedrooms, these massive bay windows. My little brother Ethan was 11 at the time and thrilled about having his own bedroom. The day we got the keys, we met the caretaker who had been checking on the place, this old guy named Mr. Peterson, who had known my great-uncle. He seemed nervous when he handed over the keys and said something that stuck with me. Just be prepared for weird things. This house has its quirks. My parents are super Christian, like church 3 times a week kind of people. My mom just smiled politely and said, "We don't believe in that sort of thing, but thank you." Dad nodded along, but I noticed he looked uncomfortable. The moving van came the next day, and we started settling in. I remember standing in what would be my bedroom on the 2nd floor, staring out the window at the neighborhood kids riding their bikes. One of them pointed at our house, and they all turned to look. When they saw me in the window, they pedaled away fast. I found out why at school the next day. "You're the new girl living in the haunted house," a girl named Ashley said during lunch. She wasn't being mean, just matter of fact. Nobody's lasted more than 2 years in that place. I laughed it off, but inside my stomach was churning. I asked her what she meant, and she shrugged. "People say there's a ghost on the top floor, a woman who killed her baby or something. I don't know, but my mom says your house has a bad reputation." I didn't tell my parents about this conversation. They would have just told me it was worldly nonsense and to pray about it. The first weird thing happened about a week after we moved in. We had these 2 dogs, a golden retriever named Buddy and a terrier mix called Peppa. They were normally super curious and explored everywhere, but neither of them would go up to the 3rd floor. They'd climb up to the landing between floors, then just sit there barking and whimpering. If we tried to lead them up, they'd pull back on their leashes and dig their claws into the carpet. Dad said they probably smelled mice or something, but I wasn't convinced. Then things started falling down the staircase. The staircase had this gap between the banister railings, not big enough for a person to fall through, but big enough for objects. One morning, we woke up to the sound of a crash and found a porcelain vase shattered on the 2nd floor landing. The weird thing was that vase had been in a display cabinet in the living room on the 1st floor. Someone must have taken it upstairs, Mom said, but none of us had. Next, it was one of Ethan's action figures, then one of Buddy's toys, all things that had no reason to be upstairs suddenly falling down through the banister gap. I started avoiding the top floor whenever I could. When I did have to go up there, like when Mom asked me to grab something from storage, I felt this pressure like someone was watching me. Sometimes I'd see a shadow in my peripheral vision, like a figure standing just out of sight. When I turned to look, nothing would be there. But I swear it felt like it was growing larger behind me every time. About a month in, I started hearing the knocking. I'd be in my bedroom doing homework, and I'd hear 3 distinct knocks on my wall. Tap, tap, tap. Then silence. At first, I thought it was my brother messing with me, but one night it happened when he was downstairs watching TV with my parents. Out of curiosity and maybe a bit of stupidity, I knocked back 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. After a pause came 4 knocks in response. My heart nearly stopped. I ran downstairs and told my mom, who came up to check. "It's probably the neighbors," she said, but we were on the side of the house that didn't have any neighbors directly adjacent. To prove her point, she knocked on the wall herself 3 times. 4 knocks came back immediately. I'll never forget the look on her face, like all the blood had drained out. She quickly composed herself and said, "It's just the pipes or the house settling. Old houses make noises." But she didn't look convinced. Halloween that year was when things escalated. We weren't allowed to celebrate Halloween because my parents considered it devil worship, so we were all home that night with the porch light off. Around 9 p.m., we heard it, a woman screaming from the attic. Not like a TV scream or something muffled. This was clear as day, like someone was being murdered directly above us. Dad grabbed a baseball bat and went up to check. The attic door was locked from our side with a padlock we'd installed because the door kept swinging open on its own. Dad unlocked it and went up, with Mom following. Ethan and I stayed at the bottom of the stairs, terrified. They found nothing. The attic was empty, just boxes of our stuff and some old furniture left by previous owners. The screaming never happened again, but I think that was the night my parents started to believe something was wrong with the house. A week later, Mom invited our pastor over for dinner. Pastor Mike was this older guy who'd known our family for years. After dinner, my parents asked him to walk through the house and bless it. I remember trailing behind as he went from room to room, sprinkling holy water and praying. When Pastor Mike reached the top floor landing, He stopped abruptly. He stood there for a good minute, just staring down the hallway toward the attic door. Then he turned to my parents and said, "There's something very negative spiritually in this space. I recommend you consider doing some remodeling up here, changing the energy." My mom asked if he meant it was haunted. He chose his words carefully. I wouldn't use that term, but there's definitely a spiritual disruption. So my parents decided to renovate the attic and third floor. They hired contractors to come in and redo everything. New drywall, new floors, new paint. The workers found some weird stuff behind the walls. Old newspapers from 1937, a child's shoe, and strangest of all, a small box containing a lock of blonde hair tied with a ribbon. The renovation took about 2 months. During that time, I had the worst nightmare of my life. I dreamed I was in the attic, but it looked like it would have 100 years ago. There was a man and woman in Victorian clothing arguing. The woman was crying, pointing to something on the floor. When I looked down, there was a baby lying there, not moving. The man was yelling at her, his face red with anger. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could feel the rage and despair in the room. I woke up gasping for breath around 3 o'clock in the morning. My room was freezing cold, even though it was May and the heat was on. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw something on my bedroom floor. It was the baby from my dream, but it was wrong. Its skin was grayish, and it was moving in ways a baby shouldn't be able to move, contorting its limbs at impossible angles. And it was making this terrible sound, not crying exactly, but a high-pitched keening noise. I tried to scream but couldn't make a sound. Then the bedroom door flew open, and I saw her, the woman from my dream. She ran through my room, her dress flowing behind her, and disappeared through my closet door. Both doors, my bedroom door and closet door, slammed shut. The baby was gone. The room was empty. I sat there until sunrise, too terrified to move or call for my parents. When I finally went downstairs for breakfast, Mom could tell something was wrong. I broke down and told her everything: the dream, the baby, the woman. Instead of dismissing me like I expected, she sat down heavily at the kitchen table. "Emma," she said quietly, "I've been doing some research on the house." She explained that she'd gone to the local historical society to look up records on our house. She found out it had been built by a wealthy businessman named Edward Blackwood. He had lived there with his wife and 3 children, plus several servants. According to newspaper articles Mom found, one of the maids had disappeared suddenly in 1906. There were rumors that she had been pregnant. The story goes, Mom said hesitantly, that she had been involved with Mr. Blackwood, and when his wife found out the maid was pregnant, Mr. Blackwood forced her to terminate the pregnancy in the attic. I felt sick. Did she die? Mom nodded. According to the rumors, yes, but it was all hushed up. The official story was that she quit and moved away. After the renovations were finished, things calmed down somewhat. The knocking stopped. The dogs still wouldn't go to the 3rd floor, but they seemed less afraid of the staircase. Objects stopped falling. My parents converted the attic into a guest bedroom, hoping that changing its purpose would help cleanse the space. Pastor Mike came back and blessed the house again. For a while, it seemed to work. But I always felt that presence. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of the woman in reflections or shadows. I'd feel cold spots walking down the hallway. Small things would go missing, then turn up in weird places. When I was 17, I started dating this guy named Jason. My parents were strict about boys, but they let him come over sometimes to watch movies in the living room where they could keep an eye on us. One weekend, when they were out of town at a church conference, they allowed Jason to stay in the guest room in the attic while my grandma stayed over as a chaperone. The next morning, Jason was pale and quiet. When we had a moment alone, he asked if I'd been up to his room during the night. "No," I said. "Why would I? My grandma was here." "Someone was in my room," he insisted. "A woman in an old-fashioned dress. She was standing over your bed, looking down at you." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean, over my bed? Your room was in the attic." "I know," he said. "But in the middle of the night, I woke up and I was in your room, sleeping in a chair by your bed. I don't remember going there. And this woman was standing over you, just staring. When she saw me looking at her, she turned to me and said, 'Leave this house.' She's mine. Then I blinked, and I was back in the attic bedroom. Jason broke up with me the next day. He wouldn't come back to my house no matter how much I begged him to explain more about what he'd seen. We moved out when I was 18 and headed to college. My parents sold the house to a young couple with a baby on the way. I sometimes wonder if they experienced anything, or if whatever was in that house finally found peace after the renovations. But on nights when I can't sleep, I still feel like I'm being watched. Sometimes I dream of that Victorian woman, and I wake up to the sound of 3 knocks on my wall. And sometimes I could swear I hear 4 knocks in response.